The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of what the driver generously called a town, though Clara thought collection of spite and splinters might be more accurate. Red Hollow sprawled across the valley floor like a drunk who'd given up on standing, crooked buildings, sagging porches, and enough dust to bury hope 6 feet deep. "This is it, miss," the driver said, not bothering to hide his pity. "You sure you want to get off here?" Clara gathered her skirt and stepped down without answering. The question didn't deserve one. Want had nothing to do with it. She'd been running for 3 months, and her money had run out 2 weeks ago. Red Hollow wasn't a choice. It was where the road ended. The driver handed down her suitcase, scuffed brown leather that had seen better decades, and tipped his hat. "Best of luck to you, miss. You're gonna need it." The stagecoach pulled away before she could respond, leaving her standing alone on a street that looked like it had been cobbled together from broken promises and bad decisions. A few faces peered out from windows, eyes narrow and unwelcoming. Nobody moved to help. Nobody spoke. Clara picked up her suitcase and started walking toward what appeared to be the largest building in town, a 2-story structure with a faded sign that read Red Hollow Saloon. If there was authority in this place, it would be there, or at least someone who could point her toward the boarding house she'd been promised in the letter. She made it exactly 12 steps before the shooting started. The saloon doors exploded outward. A man stumbled through them, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. His eyes were wide with the kind of terror that comes from knowing you're about to die and having no idea how to stop it. "Please," he gasped, lurching toward the general store across the street. "Please, I didn't—" The second shot cut him off. It hit him square in the back, and he went down hard, face first into the dirt. His hat rolled away, spinning in a lazy circle before settling near Clara's feet. She should have run, should have screamed, should have done any of the things a sensible woman would do when confronted with sudden violence on a street full of strangers. Instead, Clara stood perfectly still, her hand gripping the suitcase handle so tight her knuckles went white, and watched. The shooter emerged from the saloon like something out of a fever dream. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black from his hat to his boots. He moved with the kind of casual certainty that came from never having been told no in his entire life. His face was sharp angles and hard lines, handsome in the way a knife is handsome, beautiful right up until it cuts you. He holstered his revolver without looking at the body. His eyes swept the street, cataloging witnesses the way a rancher counts cattle. Most people had already disappeared, shutters slamming, doors locking. The few who remained kept their heads down, suddenly very interested in their own boots. Then his gaze landed on Clara. She should have looked away. Every instinct screamed at her to drop her eyes, to become invisible, to be anything other than the fool woman staring at a killer like she had a right to judge him. But Clara had spent the last 3 months running from one kind of monster, and she'd be damned if she'd spend the rest of her life flinching from every shadow that crossed her path. So she looked back. His eyes were gray. Not soft gray like morning mist, but hard gray like the barrel of a gun. They narrowed slightly, and for a moment Clara thought she might have made a fatal miscalculation. Then something shifted in his expression, too quick to name, and he turned away. "Get the sheriff," he said to no one in particular. His voice was rough, like gravel underfoot. "Tell him Magnus finally tried something stupid." A thin man in a shopkeeper's apron nodded so fast his head looked ready to fall off. "Yes, Mr. Creed. Right away, Mr. Creed." Creed. The name hit Clara like cold water. Even in her cramped boarding house in St. Louis, even while she'd been planning her escape, she'd heard whispers about Rowan Creed. The rancher who ruled the Western Territories like his own private kingdom. The man who'd killed 17 men, or was it 27? The stories never agreed on the count, only on the certainty that crossing him meant dying. And she'd just stared him down in the middle of the street. Rowan Creed walked past her without a second glance, his boots leaving prints in the blood-stained dirt. Clara waited until he disappeared around the corner before she let out the breath she'd been holding. "You're either very brave or very stupid," a voice said behind her. Clara turned to find a woman standing in the doorway of the general store, middle-aged, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile somewhere around 1855. "I haven't decided which yet," Clara replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. The woman's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Name's Margaret Davies. I run the store. She jerked her chin toward the body, where two men were already hauling it away with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. You the new school teacher? Clara Whitlock. And yes. Thought so. You got that look about you, like you think education's gonna save this place. Margaret stepped fully outside, wiping her hands on her apron. It won't, but I suppose it can't hurt. You need somewhere to stay? I was told there's a boarding house. Burned down last month. Arson, probably, though nobody's saying for sure. Margaret tilted her head. Margaret tilted her, studying Clara like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. But I got a room above the store. Not much, but it's clean, and the roof doesn't leak too bad. 50 cents a week. Clara did quick arithmetic in her head. She had exactly $3.27 to her name. At 50 cents a week, she could survive about 6 weeks if she didn't eat. Do you need help in the store? I could work in exchange for room and board 2 hours a day, 6 days a week. Margaret cut her off with the briskness of someone who'd made up her mind and didn't see the point in wasting time. You start tomorrow. Come on, I'll show you the room. Clara followed her inside, grateful and suspicious in equal measure. In her experience, kindness always came with a price tag. She just couldn't see this one yet. The room was small, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk. But it was clean, like Margaret had promised. A single window looked out over the back alley, where chickens scratched in the dirt and laundry hung limp in the still air. Outhouse is out back, Margaret said. Water pumps in the yard, no visitors after dark, and no men ever. You break that rule, you're out. Understood? Understood. Margaret nodded and turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. That man you saw today, Rowan Creed, stay away from him. He's not the worst thing in this town, but he's close enough to make no difference. What is the worst thing? Victor Hale owns the mining operation east of here. He wants the water rights to the whole valley, and he doesn't care who he has to bury to get them. Margaret's expression darkened. Creed and Hale have been circling each other like wolves for 2 years now. Eventually one of them's gonna bite, and when they do, this whole town's gonna bleed. Best stay clear of both of them. And the law? Margaret laughed, short and bitter. The law's name is Sheriff Tom Brennan, and he's about as useful as tits on a bull. Hale pays him to look the other way, and Creed scares him too much to look at all. You want justice in Red Hollow? You better bring your own. She left before Clara could ask anything else. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and looked around her new home. 4 walls, a roof, and the sound of someone dying still fresh in her ears. This was supposed to be her fresh start, her chance to disappear into anonymity and build something quiet and small and safe. Instead, she'd landed in the middle of a war. She unpacked her suitcase with methodical precision, trying not to think about the blood on the street or the gray eyes that had looked at her like she was a problem he hadn't decided how to solve yet. Dresses. 3 of them. All practical, all dark. Undergarments. A single book, spine cracked from too many readings. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a silk handkerchief, a small pistol with mother-of-pearl grips. Clara had sworn she'd never touch it again, had promised herself that leaving St. Louis meant leaving that version of herself behind, the woman who'd pointed a gun at her husband's head and pulled the trigger on an empty chamber just to watch him flinch. But here, in Red Hollow, with violence soaked into the very dirt, she unwrapped it carefully and placed it under her pillow. Some promises weren't meant to be kept. Oh, the schoolhouse wasn't a house at all. It was a shed, maybe 20 feet square, with gaps in the walls wide enough to see daylight through, and a floor that tilted at an angle that suggested the whole structure was one strong wind away from collapsing. Clara stood in the doorway the next morning, staring at the wreckage of her teaching career, and wondered if it was too late to get back on the stagecoach. "It's not much," a voice said behind her. Clara turned to find a man in his 60s, thin as a rail, with kind eyes and hands that shook slightly when he moved. "You must be Reverend Michaels. Your letter mentioned you'd be overseeing the school." Overseeing is a generous word for standing back and hoping for the best. He smiled apologetically. "The town council allocated exactly $12 for education this year. This was the best we could do." "And the children?" There's about 15 who might come, if their parents can spare them. Most work the farms or the mines. Education's a luxury here, Miss Whitlock. Clara stepped inside the shed. It smelled like rot and mouse droppings. There were no desks, no chairs, no books. Just dirt and disappointment. I'll need supplies, huh? She said. Slates, chalk, primers, at least one proper table. The council can go to hell. Clara turned to face him, surprised by the heat in her own voice. I didn't come here to babysit children in a collapsing shed. If this town wants a school, it'll have a school, a real one. I'll get the supplies myself. Reverend Michaels blinked. With what money? I'll figure it out. She had no idea how, but she'd burned too many bridges to turn back now. Just get me a list of the children's names and ages. I'll handle the rest. He left looking somewhere between impressed and concerned. Claire didn't care which. She had work to do. The next 3 days passed in a blur of scrubbing, patching, and begging. She cleaned the shed top to bottom, stuffed the worst gaps with rags and newspaper, and hauled water until her arms ached. Margaret donated 2 crates to use as makeshift seats. The Reverend found a warped plank of wood that could almost pass for a writing surface. Clara spent her last dollar on chalk and a single battered primer from a traveling salesman who looked at her like she was insane. By the 4th morning, she had something that could generously be called a schoolroom. It was still a shed, still tilted, still one strong wind from disaster. But it was clean, and it had seats, and it had her. She stood outside at dawn, waiting to see if anyone would come. The first to arrive was a girl of about 8, skinny as a stick, with tangled brown hair and a dress that had been patched so many times it was more patches than dress. She stopped 10 feet away, staring at Clara with suspicious eyes. You the teacher? I am. My name is Miss Whitlock. I'm Jenny. Ma said I had to come, but I don't gotta stay if I don't want to. That's fair, Clara said. But if you do stay, you have to try. No half measures. Jenny considered this. Can you teach me to read? If you're willing to learn. Okay? She stepped forward, still wary but curious now. But I'm only staying till noon. I got chores. 5 more children trickled in over the next hour. 2 boys who looked like brothers, another girl Jenny's age, and 2 little ones who couldn't have been more than 6. They sat on the crates, staring at Clara with a mixture of hope and skepticism that made her chest tight. She'd taught in St. Louis, in a proper schoolhouse with proper supplies and proper students whose parents paid proper tuition. This was nothing like that. This was children who'd probably never held a book, who'd spent their lives believing they were only good for labor, who had no reason to trust that she wouldn't disappoint them the way everyone else had. Clara picked up the chalk and wrote her name on the plank in large, clear letters. This is where we start, she said. Not with what you don't know, but with your own name. Because that's yours. Nobody can take it from you. By noon, Jenny could write her first name. By the end of the week, all 7 children could write theirs. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a beginning. Clara started to think maybe she could do this. Maybe she could build something here that mattered. Then Victor Hale came to town. She was walking back from the schoolhouse, tired and dusty, and thinking about nothing more complicated than whether she had energy left to heat water for a bath when she heard the commotion. A crowd had gathered in front of the saloon, miners mostly, rough men with hard hands and harder eyes. At the center stood a man Clara had never seen before, but she knew immediately who he was. Victor Hale had the look of someone who'd learned early that money could buy anything, including people, and had spent his life proving it. He was shorter than she'd expected, compact and well-dressed, with oiled hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He stood on the saloon steps like a politician at a rally, gesturing broadly as he spoke. A new era for Red Hollow, he was saying. Progress. Prosperity. Jobs for every man willing to work. All I need is cooperation from the local landowners, reasonable compensation for water access, and we all get rich together. And if they don't cooperate, someone called from the crowd. Hale's smile widened. Then I suppose they don't want what's best for this town. Adios. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. She'd heard speeches like this before. had watched men like Hale smile and promise and quietly destroy anyone who stood in their way. Her father had been one of them. "What about Creed?" another voice asked. "His ranch controls half the water in the valley." "Mr. Creed and I have had conversations," Hale said smoothly. "I'm confident we can reach an understanding. Creed don't understand nothing but bullets." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Hale's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something cold and calculating. "Violence is a tool of desperate men," he said. "I prefer more civilized methods. Now, who's ready to drink to our future?" The crowd cheered and surged into the saloon. Hale followed, already shaking hands and slapping backs like he owned the place. Maybe he did. Maybe he owned all of them. Clara was turning to leave when she saw him, Rowan Creed, standing in the shadow of the general store, watching Hale's performance with an expression that could have frozen fire. Their eyes met for the second time. He didn't look away, and neither did she. The moment stretched long enough to become uncomfortable, then longer still. Clara felt pinned, examined, assessed. She wondered what he saw. A fool schoolteacher playing at respectability, probably. Someone who didn't belong and wouldn't last. Good. Let him think that. She turned and walked away, feeling his gaze on her back the entire way to Margaret's store. What? The war started small. A broken fence here, a poisoned water source there. Creed's cattle found dead in the morning. Hale's miners jumped on their way back to camp. Nothing big enough to call murder, but everything calculated to provoke. The town grew tense, like a string pulled too tight. People took sides without meaning to, just by virtue of who employed them, or who they owed. Clara tried to stay neutral, tried to focus on her students and her work and keeping her head down. But Red Hollow was too small for neutrality. It was a Saturday night, 3 weeks after she'd arrived. Clara had made the mistake of accepting Margaret's invitation to dinner at the saloon. Just this once, you need to eat something besides hardtack and regret. And found herself sitting in a corner booth trying to ignore the noise and smoke and general chaos. That's when Rowan Creed walked in. The room didn't go silent exactly, but the noise changed, became more careful. Men shifted in their seats. Conversations dropped to murmurs. The piano player kept playing, but his hands stumbled over the keys. Creed walked to the bar like he owned it. And maybe he did. Clara didn't know the ownership of every building in town. The bartender poured him whiskey without being asked. He drank it in one swallow and poured another. "Heard Hale's been making offers," the bartender said quietly. "He can offer whatever he wants, doesn't mean I'm selling. He's got the investors behind him now. Pressure's gonna build." "Let it build." Creed's voice was flat, emotionless. "I've survived worse than Victor Hale." Clara told herself to look away, to mind her own business, to remember Margaret's warning and every instinct she'd developed over 27 years of life. But Creed turned then, his gaze sweeping the room, and once again it landed on her. This time he walked over. Clara's heart kicked against her ribs. Margaret had disappeared to the bar, leaving her alone at the table. She had nowhere to run and no excuse to leave. She sat frozen as Rowan Creed crossed the saloon floor and stopped at her booth. Up close, he was even more imposing. Taller than she'd realized. Broader. The scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw was more visible in the lamplight, a pale line against tanned skin. His hands, resting on the back of the booth's empty bench, were scarred too, knuckles that had seen too many fights. "You're the teacher," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "How's that going?" Clara blinked, thrown by the question. "Fine. 7 students so far. I'm hoping for more." "You won't get them. Parents around here don't see the point. Then I'll change their minds." Something flickered across his face. Amusement, maybe, or admiration. It was gone too fast to tell. "You're either stubborn or stupid." "I've been told it's both." His mouth twitched. Not a smile, but almost. "Mind if I sit?" Every warning bell in Clara's head started ringing at once. "Say no. Tell him you're leaving. Don't get involved with this man in whatever war he's fighting." "It's your town," she heard herself say instead. "I assume that means it's your booth, too." He slid into the seat across from her, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd learned not to make sudden movements around skittish things. The bartender appeared instantly with another glass of whiskey, which Creed ignored. "It's not my town," he said. "I just happen to own most of the land around it. And that's different how? Town belongs to whoever's willing to fight for it. I just fight for what's mine." Clara studied him, trying to reconcile the man in front of her with the stories. He didn't look like a monster, didn't sound like one, but she'd learned the hard way that monsters rarely announce themselves. "Why are you talking to me?" she asked bluntly. "Curiosity. You looked me in the eye twice now. Most people can't manage it once." "Maybe I'm too ignorant to know better. Or maybe you're not afraid of the right things." He leaned back, studying her with those unsettling gray eyes. "Where are you from?" "St. Louis. Long way from home. It's not my home anymore." "Running from something?" The question was casual, almost lazy, but Clara heard the sharp intelligence underneath. Rowan Creed was a lot of things, but stupid wasn't one of them. "Aren't we all?" she said. He smiled then, a real smile, brief and startling. It transformed his face, made him look younger, almost approachable. Then it was gone, locked away behind the careful blankness he wore like armor. "Fair enough?" He stood, picking up the untouched whiskey glass. "Good luck with your school, Miss Whitlock. You're going to need it." He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the crowd like smoke. Margaret reappeared moments later, sliding into the seat he'd vacated. "What did he want?" "I have no idea," Clara said honestly. "Whatever it was, stay away from him. I meant what I said before. Creed's dangerous." "He didn't seem dangerous. That's how he gets you." Margaret's expression was grim. "He seems reasonable, controlled, almost human. Then someone crosses a line you didn't know existed, and he kills them without blinking. I've seen it happen. Everyone in this town has." Clara looked toward the bar where Creed stood talking to two ranch hands. He looked tired, she realized, worn down by something heavier than just the threat of war with Victor Hale. "What happened to him?" she asked. "To make him like this?" "Fire," Margaret said simply. 10 years ago. His family's house burned with his wife and daughter inside. He was away, didn't get back in time to save them. Some say it was an accident, some say it wasn't. Either way, the man who came out of that fire wasn't the same one who went in. Clara's chest tightened. She knew that particular kind of grief, the kind that hollowed you out and filled the empty space with something sharp and unforgiving. He never remarried? No, never looked at another woman, far as anyone can tell. Just built that fortress of a ranch and started collecting enemies like some people collect stamps. Margaret shook her head. "You feel sorry for him, don't you?" "Don't. He's made his choices and we all have to live with them." But Clara did feel sorry for him, despite the warnings, despite the body she'd seen him drop in the street, despite every reasonable instinct telling her to keep her distance, because she recognized the look in his eyes, the one that said he'd survived something he shouldn't have and didn't know what to do with the life he had left. She'd seen that same look in her mirror every morning for the past 3 months. The dance was Margaret's idea. "The town needs something normal," she insisted, cornering Clara in the general store. "Something that isn't about Creed and Hale and who's going to shoot who. A social, dancing, food, maybe some music that isn't being pounded out by a drunk piano player. What do you think?" Clara thought it was a terrible idea, thought putting every faction in Red Hollow in the same room was asking for bloodshed. But Margaret's eyes were bright with determination, and Clara had learned not to argue when the older woman got like this. "Fine," she said. "When?" "Saturday night, the church hall. I'll organize the food if you help with decorations." "I don't know anything about decorations." "Neither do I. We'll figure it out." They did somehow. Paper streamers that looked like they'd survived a war. Lanterns borrowed from half the town. Tables dragged from the saloon and covered with cloths that hid the worst stains. It looked ridiculous and desperate and oddly hopeful. Clara stood in the church hall on Saturday evening, watching people trickle in, and wondered if this was what building a community looked like, making something beautiful out of scraps and stubbornness. The musicians were three ranch hands with a fiddle, a guitar, and a harmonica. They weren't good exactly, but they were enthusiastic. People started dancing, awkward at first, then with increasing confidence. Even the children got involved, spinning in chaotic circles that made Clara's students shriek with laughter. She stood against the wall, content to watch. Dancing meant partners, and partners meant questions she didn't want to answer. Better to stay invisible. Then Rowan Creed walked through the door. The music didn't stop this time. The conversations continued, but Clara felt the shift, the collective inhale, the slight stiffening of shoulders. Creed surveyed the room with his usual careful assessment, nodded to a few people who nodded back, and made his way to the punch table. Clara told herself to stay put, to not look at him, to absolutely, under no circumstances, do anything that might be interpreted as interest. She lasted exactly 4 minutes before her traitorous feet carried her across the room. "This doesn't seem like your kind of event," she said by way of greeting. Creed looked down at her, something unreadable in his expression. "It's not. But Margaret Davies personally threatened to drag me here by my ear, and I'm more scared of her than I am of most men I know." Clara surprised herself by laughing. "Smart. I try." He hesitated then. "Would you dance with me?" Every warning bell that had gone off when he sat at her table rang twice as loud now. Dancing with Rowan Creed in front of the entire town was the opposite of keeping her head down, was courting exactly the kind of attention she'd come here to avoid. "Yes," she heard herself say. His hand was warm when he took hers, his palm calloused from ranch work. He led her to the makeshift dance floor with the same controlled precision he brought to everything else. The music shifted to something slower, and Clara found herself in a proper waltz position, close enough to smell leather and smoke, and something that might have been soap. "I should warn you," she said. "I'm not very good at this." "Neither am I." He was lying. He moved with the kind of natural grace that came from years of practice, leading her through the steps with patient precision. Clara focused on not stepping on his feet and trying to ignore the curious stares from everyone around them. "Why did you really come tonight?" she asked quietly. "Same reason as you, trying to pretend I'm a normal person who does normal things." "Are you? Normal?" His mouth twisted. "No, but I'm trying to remember what it felt like." They turned in a slow circle. Clara caught sight of Margaret watching them with an expression somewhere between horror and resignation. Across the room, she saw Victor Hale standing in the doorway, his calculating eyes tracking their every move. "This is a mistake," she said. "Probably. People are staring. Let them. I came here to disappear, not to become the subject of gossip." "Too late for that." His hand tightened fractionally on her waist. "You stared down a killer in the middle of the street. You're teaching children in a shed. You're friends with the most opinionated woman in 3 territories. You were never going to disappear." The song ended. Creed stepped back, releasing her with the same careful control he'd used to take her hand. He nodded once, formal, distant, and walked away before she could respond. Clara stood in the middle of the dance floor, feeling like she'd just stepped off a cliff and was waiting to see if she could fly or if she'd just fall. Margaret appeared at her elbow. "What were you thinking?" "I wasn't," Clara said honestly. "Hale's going to see that as a declaration. Creed doesn't dance with anyone. Everyone knows that. Now he's danced with you, and Hale's going to wonder why." "I'm a school teacher. I'm nobody." "You're somebody now." Margaret's voice was grim. "And in a town at war, that's the most dangerous thing you can be." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could still fade into the background, still build her quiet life of teaching and anonymity. But she caught sight of Victor Hale watching her across the room, his expression thoughtful and calculating, and felt the truth settle into her bones like cold. She'd made herself visible. And in Red Hollow, visibility was the same as painting a target on your back. The dance ended an hour later without incident. People trickled home in groups, calling goodbyes and making plans. Clara helped Margaret clean up, stacking chairs and taking down decorations in silence. When she finally made it back to her room above the general store, Exhausted and confused and oddly unsettled, she found something waiting on her pillow. A single white flower, stem wrapped in cloth. No note, no explanation. Clara picked it up carefully, studying it in the lamplight. It wasn't a threat, at least she didn't think so, but it was a message. Someone had been in her room. Someone had left this. She thought about Rowan Creed's careful hands and controlled movements, thought about the way he'd looked at her on the dance floor, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Then she thought about Victor Hale's calculating expression and Margaret's warnings and the bodies she'd seen on her first day in town. Clara wrapped the flower back in its cloth and put it in her trunk, underneath her dresses where nobody would find it. Tomorrow she'd go back to teaching, back to pretending she was just a school teacher in a frontier town, nothing more. Back to the life she'd come here to build. But tonight, alone in her small room with a flower she couldn't explain and questions she was afraid to answer, Clara Whitlock admitted the truth she'd been avoiding since the moment she stepped off that stagecoach. Her quiet life was over before it had ever really begun. And the war that was coming, the one between Rowan Creed and Victor Hale, between violence and civilization, between the past and whatever might come next, she was standing right in the middle of it, whether she wanted to be or not. The flower was gone by morning. Clara had checked her trunk 3 times, pulling out dresses and undergarments and the small pistol she kept wrapped in silk. But the white flower had disappeared as completely as if it had never existed. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the empty space where it should have been, and tried to convince herself she'd imagined the whole thing. She almost succeeded. Then she went downstairs and found Margaret standing behind the store counter with her arms crossed and her mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "We need to talk," Margaret said. "About what?" "About the fact that you danced with Rowan Creed last night, and now half the town thinks you're either his mistress or his next target, and I can't figure out which one scares me more." Clara felt heat creep up her neck. "It was one dance. It was a declaration. You might as well have stood on the roof and announced you were taking sides." Margaret leaned forward, her voice dropping low. "Victor Hale sent someone to ask questions about you this morning. Where you're from, why you came here, who you know. I told them to go to hell, but Clara, they're looking at you now, really looking." The heat in Clara's neck turned cold. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that mean he's trying to figure out if you're useful or dangerous. And with Hale, those are the only 2 categories that matter." Clara gripped the edge of the counter. She'd been so careful in St. Louis, covering her tracks, using the last of her savings to buy passage under a different name. But careful only worked if nobody was looking. If Hale started digging, started asking the right questions in the right places, he might find things she'd buried deep. "I need to teach," she said, forcing her voice steady. "The children are expecting me. The children can wait 5 minutes while you listen to sense. Stay away from Creed. Stay away from Hale. Keep your head down and focus on that falling apart shed you call a school, please." Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She gathered her things and walked to the schoolhouse in the gray dawn light, feeling eyes on her from every window she passed. The children were already waiting when she arrived, 9 of them now, including 2 new boys whose mother had finally agreed to let them attend. They sat on the crates and watched her with the careful attention of people who'd learned young that adults were unpredictable and promises were usually lies. Clara pushed everything else aside, the flower, the dance, the questions she couldn't answer, and picked up the chalk. "Today," she said, "we're going to learn about numbers. Who can count to 10? All 9 hands went up. She smiled despite everything. "Then let's see if we can get to 20. The morning passed in the familiar rhythm of teaching, recitation and correction, praise and patience. Jenny was getting faster at her letters. The 2 brothers, Sam and David, had a natural head for arithmetic. Little Mary, barely 6, could already read simple words. They were hungry for knowledge in a way Clara's St. Louis students had never been, grabbing onto every lesson like it might disappear if they didn't hold tight enough. She was halfway through a geography lesson, using a stick to draw a rough map of the territories in the dirt, when she heard horses outside. The children heard them too. They went still, that particular kind of alertness that came from living in a place where unexpected visitors usually meant trouble. Clara set down the stick and moved to the door. 4 men on horseback sat in front of the schoolhouse. 3 of them wore the rough clothes of ranch hands, dust-covered and hard-eyed. The 4th was Rowan Creed. He dismounted with easy grace and walked toward her, stopping a careful distance away. Close enough to talk, far enough to run if she needed to. "Miss Whitlock," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Sorry to interrupt." "Then don't." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, edged with the morning's frustration and fear. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe, or approval. "Fair enough, but I need 5 minutes of your time." "I'm teaching." "I can see that. And from what I hear, you're doing a decent job of it." He glanced past her at the children, who were watching through the gaps in the walls with wide eyes. "But this can't wait." Clara felt her stomach drop. "What can't wait?" "Victor Hale made you an offer this morning, sent one of his men to Margaret's store with a letter and $50. Did you get it?" "No." "Good. That means Margaret's got more sense than I gave her credit for." Creed's expression was carefully neutral, but Clara could see tension in the way he held himself. The offer was this: Hale wants to hire you as a tutor for his investors' children. Private lessons, 3 times a week, generous pay. In exchange, you'd move into accommodations he provides and stop teaching the town children. Clara's hands clenched into fists. "And you're telling me this because it's not a job offer. It's a test. Hale wants to see if he can buy you, and more importantly, he wants to see how I react when he tries." Creed took a step closer, his voice dropping low. "You take that offer. You become his. You refuse it. You stay mine. Either way, you're a piece in a game you didn't ask to play." "I'm not yours," Clara said flatly. "I'm not anyone's. That's not how it works here. You danced with me. In this town, that means something." "Then maybe you shouldn't have asked. Maybe you shouldn't have said yes." He pulled an envelope from his jacket and held it out. "This is from me. Not an offer, not a threat, just information you should have." Clara stared at the envelope like it might bite her. "What kind of information?" "The kind that explains what you're caught in the middle of. Read it or don't. Your choice." He turned back toward his horse, then paused. "One more thing. That flower you found last night wasn't from me." Ice slid down Clara's spine. "How did you know about the flower?" "Because I've got men watching your room, have since the night of the dance. If I'd wanted to leave you something, I'd have done it properly, knocked on your door like a civilized human being, not snuck in like a thief." His eyes were hard when he looked back at her. "Someone else was in your room, Miss Whitlock. Someone who wanted you to know they could get to you any time they wanted. My men didn't see who, which means whoever it was is good enough to slip past people I pay to be careful." Clara's throat went dry. "Why are you watching me?" "Because Hale's watching you, and I don't trust him not to do something stupid." Creed swung up into his saddle with practiced ease. "You want my men gone. Say the word, but understand that if I pull them, you're on your own. And right now, being on your own in Red Hollow is the same as being dead." He rode off before she could respond, his men following in a tight formation that spoke of military training or long practice. Clara stood in the doorway, clutching the envelope, feeling the weight of 9 pairs of eyes on her back. She turned to find the children still staring through the gaps in the walls. "Is that the bad man?" little Mary asked in a whisper. "I don't know," Clara said honestly. "But we're going to finish our lesson anyway. Get back to your seats." They obeyed, but the energy had shifted. The rest of the morning felt strained, distracted. When noon came and the children scattered to their chores, Clara sat alone in the tilted shed and opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were 3 pieces of paper. The first was a map of the valley, hand-drawn but detailed, showing ranch boundaries, water sources, and the locations of Hale's mining operations. The second was a list of names, investors, lawyers, territorial officials, with brief notes beside each. Bought, blackmailed, scared, useful. The third was a letter in neat, precise handwriting. "Miss Whitlock, by now you've figured out that you're in the middle of something bigger than a schoolhouse and a teaching job. I won't apologize for dragging you into it. You walked in on your own when you stepped off that stagecoach. But you deserve to know what you're dealing with. Victor Hale wants the water rights to this valley. He's got investors in San Francisco who've put up money for a mining operation that'll strip the land bare and make them all rich. The only thing standing in his way is me and about 6 other ranchers who won't sell. He's been picking us off one by one, buying some, threatening others, driving the stubborn ones into bankruptcy or graves. I'm the last one left with enough land and water to make his operation unviable, which means he's going to come at me with everything he's got. And anyone close to me becomes a target. You're close to me now, whether you want to be or not. That dance made sure of it, so you've got 3 choices. 1, take Hale's offer. Move into his accommodations, teach his children, become his creature. You'll be safe, comfortable, and complicit in whatever he does to this valley. 2, leave. I'll pay for a stagecoach ticket to anywhere you want to go. No strings, no questions. You can disappear the same way you appeared. 3, stay, keep teaching, keep building something that matters. But understand that if you stay, you're choosing a side, my side. And that comes with risks I can't protect you from, no matter how many men I station outside your window. Choose wisely. R.C. Clara read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. Her hands had stopped shaking. That was something. She thought about Street, Lewis, and the life she'd run from. The husband who'd smiled while he hurt her. The society that had looked the other way. The woman she'd become in that gilded cage. She'd pulled a trigger on an empty chamber and watched him flinch, then packed a bag and left before he could decide whether to kill her or just make her wish he had. She'd come to Red Hollow to disappear. To build something small and safe and invisible. But maybe small and safe and invisible was just another kind of cage. Clara stood up, brushed the dust from her skirt, and walked back to Margaret's store with her spine straight and her decision made. Margaret took one look at her face and sighed. "You're staying." "I'm staying." "You're an idiot." "Probably." Clara set the envelope on the counter. "But I'm an idiot who's going to need some help. Can you get a message to Creed?" "What kind of message?" "Tell him I'm staying. Tell him to pull his men from my window. If I'm choosing a side, I'm doing it properly, not hiding behind guards like some frightened child." Clara met Margaret's eyes. "And tell him if he's got a war coming, he might want someone who knows how to think instead of just shoot." Margaret stared at her for a long moment, then started laughing, a rusty, surprised sound. "You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the stupidest. I genuinely can't tell which. Ask me again when this is over. If you survive that long." But Margaret was already reaching for paper and pen. "I'll get the message to him. But Clara, once you do this, there's no taking it back. You understand that?" "I understand." She did too. This wasn't like St. Louis, where she could pack a bag and disappear in the night. This was choosing to stand in the open and see what happened. Choosing to matter instead of hide. It was terrifying. It was also the first honest thing she'd done in months. That evening, Clara was preparing for bed when she heard a knock on her door. She opened it to find Rowan Creed standing in the hallway, hat in his hands, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Got your message," he said. "That was fast." "Margaret's efficient when she wants to be. Can I come in?" Clara hesitated. Having a man in her room after dark violated Margaret's most sacred rule. But Margaret had already bent enough rules today, and Clara was apparently in the business of choosing battles now. "5 minutes," she said, stepping aside. Creed entered like he was walking into enemy territory, careful, alert, ready to retreat. He looked around the small space with those assessing eyes, taking in the narrow bed, the washstand, the trunk with her possessions. His gaze lingered on the window, where his men would have been stationed until she'd told him to pull them. "You're serious about this?" he said. "About staying?" "Yes." "Even knowing what it might cost you?" "Especially knowing." Clara crossed her arms. "I didn't come to Red Hollow to hide forever. I came here to build something that mattered. A school, a future. Something that couldn't be taken away by men who think power means they can do whatever they want." She paused. "Sound familiar?" His mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You think you know me?" "I think we're both running from the same thing. The difference is you're running toward a fight, and I've been running away from one." Clara sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly tired. "I'm done running." Creed was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled the room's single chair away from the wall and sat down, setting his hat on his knee. If we're doing this, you need to understand what you're dealing with. Hale's not just greedy, he's smart. He's got lawyers who can tie up land rights for years, investors who can pressure territorial officials, and enough money to buy anyone who's for sale. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've got land, water, and a reputation that scares people. That's kept him at bay so far. But he's getting desperate, and desperate men do stupid things. Like what? Like burning ranches, poisoning water, arranging accidents? His voice was flat, matter of fact. 3 of the ranchers who refused to sell had accidents in the past year. One fell off his horse and broke his neck. One got caught in a barn fire. One just disappeared, never found the body. Clara felt cold. And the law? Sheriff Brennan's about as useful as you'd expect from a man on Hale's payroll. He rules everything an accident and moves on. Creed's jaw tightened. I've been gathering evidence, trying to build a case that'll hold up when I take it to the territorial governor. But evidence is hard to come by when witnesses keep dying or leaving town. What about your ranch hands? Your men? Loyal, well paid, good in a fight, but they're not lawyers or investigators. He looked at her directly. Margaret said you told her I might want someone who knows how to think. What did you mean? Clara chose her words carefully. My father was a businessman in St. Louis. Real estate, mostly. I watched him buy people, threaten people, destroy people for 20 years. I know how men like Hale operate. I know the games they play and the weaknesses they hide. She paused. I also know that brute force isn't always the answer. Sometimes the best way to win a fight is to make your enemy destroy himself. Creed studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away. She didn't. Your father teach you that? He asked. No, my husband did. The words came out bitter. He was very good at making me feel like everything was my fault. Took me 3 years to realize he was just following a script, and once I knew the script, I could see all the places it could fall apart. Is that why you left? That's why I'm still alive. Clara stood, suddenly restless. Look, I don't know if I can help you. I don't know if thinking is enough when the other side has money and lawyers and no conscience, but I do know that if I'm going to be a target anyway, I'd rather be a useful target than a victim. Creed rose too, moving to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob. I pulled my men from your window like you asked, but I'm putting them back on the building. Not watching you, watching for trouble. That's non-negotiable. Fine. And if Hale comes at you directly, if anyone threatens you or tries to hurt you, you come to me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself. Don't think you can talk your way out of it. Just run. Understood? I have a gun, Clara said. That stopped him. He turned back, eyebrows raised. You know how to use it? Well enough. Have you ever shot anyone? The question hung in the air between them. Clara thought about that night in St. Louis, the weight of the pistol in her hand, the empty chambers she'd counted before pointing it at her husband's head, the click of the hammer on nothing, his face, white with fear and fury. No, she said. But I've wanted to. Creed's expression shifted into something that might have been respect. Keep it close then. But remember, wanting to shoot someone and actually doing it are very different things. Most people freeze when the moment comes. Did you? The first time? No. He said it simply, without pride or shame. I was 16. Man tried to rob my father's ranch. I killed him and buried him before my hands stopped shaking. He opened the door. Get some sleep, Miss Whitlock. Tomorrow, we start figuring out how to beat Hale at his own game. He was gone before she could respond, his boots echoing in the hallway. Clara stood alone in her small room, listening to the sounds of the town settling in for the night, and wondered what she'd just agreed to. The next morning brought answers she didn't want. Clara was walking to the schoolhouse when she saw the crowd gathered in the street, the same spot where she'd watched a man die on her first day in Red Hollow. For a horrible moment, she thought it was happening again. Then she got close enough to see what everyone was staring at. The schoolhouse was gone. Not destroyed, not burned, just gone. The crates she'd used for seats were scattered across the yard. The plank that had served as a writing board lay splintered in the dirt. Even the walls had been knocked down, leaving nothing but a pile of rotting wood and broken dreams. Clara stood frozen, staring at the wreckage. She'd known there would be consequences for choosing a side. She just hadn't expected them so soon or so thoroughly. "Happened sometime after midnight," Reverend Michaels said quietly, appearing at her elbow. "Nobody saw anything. Nobody heard anything." "Hale," Clara said. Her voice sounded distant, disconnected. "Maybe. Or maybe just folks who don't like the idea of education for their children. Could be anyone." But his tone said he didn't believe that any more than she did. Clara walked forward, kneeling in the dirt to pick up pieces of chalk. They were ground to powder under boot heels. Deliberate. Thorough. She heard the children before she saw them. Jenny and her brothers, little Mary and the others, standing at the edge of the destruction with faces that had already learned disappointment too young. "Is there going to be school today?" Jenny asked. Her voice was small. Clara looked at the ruins, at the children, at the town watching to see what she'd do. She thought about running, about taking Creed's offer of a stagecoach ticket and disappearing before things got worse. Then she stood up, brushed the chalk dust from her hands, and smiled. "Yes," she said. "There's going to be school, right here." She cleared a space in the dirt, smoothing it with her boot. Picked up a stick and drew letters, the way she'd drawn the map yesterday. The children gathered around, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. Today's lesson, Clara announced loud enough for the watching crowd to hear, is about persistence. Can anyone tell me what that word means? Sam, the older of the two brothers, raised his hand. It means not giving up even when things are hard. Exactly right. Clara wrote the word in the dirt in large, clear letters, and we're going to practice it by learning every lesson I'd planned for this week, right here in this spot, until someone builds us a new schoolhouse or I run out of dirt to write in. She heard murmurs from the crowd, saw Reverend Michaels smile, caught sight of Margaret watching from the general store steps with her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. They spent the morning in the dirt. Children crowded around while Clara taught arithmetic and geography and spelling with nothing but sticks and determination. It was harder than teaching in the shed had been. People walked past and stared. Some shouted insults. Others just shook their heads like she was a fool. But the children learned, and that was enough. At noon, when the children scattered to their chores, Clara found Rowan Creed waiting by the ruins of her schoolhouse. He surveyed the destruction with cold eyes, his jaw tight. "I should have seen this coming," he said. "How? You're not responsible for every petty act of violence in this town." "I am when it happens because of me." He kicked at a piece of splintered wood. "This is Hale's warning. He's saying he can take away anything you care about anytime he wants. Then he doesn't understand me very well." Clara met his gaze. "I grew up watching my father destroy people's livelihoods for fun. I married a man who took pleasure in breaking things I loved. I'm not impressed by destruction anymore. It just makes me angry." "Angry's good. Angry's useful." Creed glanced toward the general store. "Margaret's organizing a building committee. Says she's got lumber from old Hoskins' barn that nobody's using, and enough men willing to work to put up something proper by the end of the week." Clara blinked. "She is?" "She's also cursing your name for making her care about a falling-apart school. But yes," something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "You've got a talent for inspiring people, Miss Whitlock, even when they don't want to be inspired." "That what I'm doing?" "That or forcing them to choose sides. Sometimes they're the same thing." He started to leave, then paused. "There's a gathering at my ranch tomorrow night. Ranchers, businessmen, a few territorial officials I've got on retainer. We're discussing strategy for dealing with Hale. I want you there." "Why?" "Because you said you know how men like Hale operate. I want to see if you're right." His expression was serious. "And because if you're going to be part of this, you need to see exactly what you're part of. No illusions, no pleasant fictions. Just the truth about what we're up against and what it might take to win." Clara thought about the flower that had disappeared from her trunk, the schoolhouse that had been destroyed in the night, the children who'd shown up anyway, hungry for knowledge in a world that seemed determined to deny them. "What time?" she asked. 6 o'clock. I'll send someone to escort you." "I can ride." "Not to my ranch, you can't. It's 12 miles through territory Hale's men patrol regular. You go alone, you might not make it." He tipped his hat. "Tomorrow at 6, Miss Whitlock. Don't be late." He rode off, leaving Clara standing in the ruins of her first real attempt at building something that mattered. She looked around at the scattered wood, the broken chalk, the words she'd written in the dirt already half erased by passing feet. Then she picked up her stick and started writing them again. The escort Creed sent the next evening was a surprise. A woman in her 40s wearing men's clothes and carrying a rifle like she knew how to use it. She introduced herself as Sarah and offered no explanation for her presence or her occupation. They rode in silence through the fading light, following narrow trails that wound between rock formations and scattered pine. Clara had borrowed a horse from Margaret's stable and discovered she was rustier at riding than she'd admitted. Sarah didn't comment on her awkward seat or the way she gripped the reins too tight, just kept pace and watched the horizon. Creed's ranch appeared suddenly as they crested a ridge, a sprawling complex of buildings surrounded by fences and guards. The main house was larger than Clara had expected, built from stone and timber with a wide porch and shuttered windows. It looked like a fortress pretending to be a home. Sarah led her to the house and handed her off to a man who introduced himself as Webb, Creed's foreman. He showed her to a sitting room where 6 men were already gathered, drinks in hand, conversation flowing. The talk died when Clara walked in. She recognized 2 of the men, local ranchers she'd seen in town. The others were strangers, though their expensive clothes and careful speech marked them as the territorial officials Creed had mentioned. They stared at her with expressions ranging from confusion to open hostility. "Gentlemen," Creed said, appearing in the doorway behind her, "this is Clara Whitlock. She's joining our discussion tonight." "The school teacher?" one of the ranchers said. "What's she doing here?" "Helping us think." Creed moved to the sideboard and poured whiskey into a glass. "Miss Whitlock's got experience with men like Hale. I thought her perspective might be useful." Her perspective. The man who spoke was elderly, with a face like cracked leather. "No offense, miss, but this is a matter of land and water and legal rights. What could a schoolteacher possibly contribute?" Clara had faced rooms full of her father's business associates, had sat through dinners where powerful men discussed crushing their competitors like it was casual conversation. She knew how to hold her ground. "I can contribute the understanding that you're going to lose," she said calmly. Silence fell like a stone. The elderly rancher's face darkened. "Excuse me? You're going to lose because you're fighting the wrong fight. Hale doesn't care about legal rights or fair compensation. He cares about winning, and he's willing to do things you're not willing to do. Unless you change your strategy, he'll pick you off one by one until Mr. Creed here is the only one left standing. Then he'll destroy him too, because by that point he'll have the resources and the time to do it properly." Clara accepted the whiskey glass Creed handed her. "I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because pretending you're in a fair fight when you're not is how you get buried." The elderly rancher started to respond, but one of the officials, a thin man with intelligent eyes, held up a hand. "She's not wrong, Patterson. Hale's been using legal maneuvers to tie up land disputes for months. Every rancher who's tried to fight him in court has lost." "Then what do you suggest?" Patterson demanded, looking at Clara. "That we fight dirty too? I suggest you fight smart." Clara set down her glass. "Hale's advantage is money and lawyers. Your advantage is that you're here and he's not. He has to rely on intermediaries, foremen, hired guns, corrupt officials. Every intermediary is a weakness. Every transaction leaves evidence. Every lie he tells creates a contradiction." She looked around the room. "Stop trying to prove he's wrong in court. Start building a case that he's criminal, extortion, arson, murder. Make him defend himself instead of attacking you." Creed was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "And how do we build that case when witnesses keep disappearing?" "You protect the witnesses you have and find the ones he doesn't know exist. Ranch hands who've been fired. Miners who've seen things they weren't supposed to see. Anyone Hale considers too unimportant to threaten." Clara thought about the children in her classroom, the way they saw everything adults thought they missed. Sometimes the best witnesses are the ones nobody's paying attention to. The discussion that followed was heated, sprawling, occasionally brilliant. Clara listened more than she spoke, learning the landscape of alliances and grudges that made up territorial politics. She learned that two of the officials were genuinely trying to help. One was probably on Hale's payroll, and the rest were simply trying to survive. By the time the meeting broke up near midnight, they had the outline of a plan, careful, slow, built on patience and evidence rather than confrontation. It probably wouldn't work, but it was better than what they'd had before. Clara was the last to leave. She found Creed on the porch, staring out at the dark valley. "You did well in there," he said without turning around. "I told them what they didn't want to hear. That's not the same as doing well." "It is when they listen." He glanced at her. "Patterson wants to hire you as a consultant, offered to pay double what the town's paying for teaching." "What did you tell him?" "That you'd decide for yourself." Creed leaned against the porch railing. "But between you and me, having someone with your insight full-time might make the difference between winning and losing." Clara joined him at the railing, looking out at the same darkness. Somewhere out there was Red Hollow, her students, the ruins of a schoolhouse that was already being rebuilt. Somewhere out there was Victor Hale, planning his next move. "I came here to teach children," she said quietly, "not to be a consultant in a range war. And if those children need you to win the war before they can keep learning?" It was a fair question. Clara didn't have a good answer. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, crickets, distant cattle, the wind moving through the pines. It was peaceful in a way Clara hadn't expected. She'd thought Creed's ranch would feel like a fortress, tense and dangerous. Instead, it felt almost safe. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask." "Why did you dance with me that night at the social?" Creed was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because you looked like you needed someone to remind you that you're still alive, and because I needed the same thing." He turned to face her fully. "I've spent 10 years being the monster everyone expects me to be. It's easier that way. No disappointment, no complicated feelings, just the simple arithmetic of threat and response. But then you showed up and looked me in the eye like I was just a man. And I thought—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I thought maybe I could remember how to be one, even if just for a dance." Clara's throat felt tight. "And did you remember?" "For 3 minutes. His smile was crooked, sad. Then reality came back, and I remembered why I don't do things like that anymore. Why I can't. Because of your wife. Because I failed her." The words came out flat, emotionless, like he'd said them so many times they'd lost all meaning. "I was supposed to protect her. I was supposed to be there. Instead, I was dealing with a property dispute 30 miles away while our house burned and she died screaming my name." He looked away. "You don't come back from that. You don't get to have normal things again. You just survive and try to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." Clara reached out before she could stop herself, putting her hand over his where it gripped the railing. His skin was warm, calloused, real. "You're not the only person who's failed someone," she said. "And you're not the only one who thinks they don't deserve a second chance. But maybe that's exactly why we should take one anyway, because we know how valuable they are." Creed looked at their joined hands, then at her face. Something in his expression shifted, softened. For just a moment, he looked like someone who wasn't carrying the weight of ghosts and guilt. Then Sarah appeared in the doorway, clearing her throat apologetically. "Sorry to interrupt, but we should get Miss Whitlock back to town before it gets any later. Hale's men have been more active at night lately." The moment broke. Creed stepped back and Clara let her hand fall away, feeling oddly bereft. "Right," Creed said. "Sarah, make sure she gets home safe. Webb, I want double patrols tonight. If Hale's men are moving, I want to know where." The ride back to Red Hollow was uneventful but tense. Sarah kept her rifle ready, eyes scanning the darkness for threats that never materialized. When they finally reached Margaret's store, Clara was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. She climbed the stairs to her room, expecting to find it empty and dark. Instead, she found Margaret sitting on her bed, holding a piece of paper. "This was slipped under the door," Margaret said. Her face was pale. "I've been waiting for you to get back." Clara took the paper. It was good quality, expensive, the kind of stationery wealthy men used for important correspondence. The message was brief. Miss Whitlock, I understand you've declined my employment offer. That's unfortunate, as I believe we could have been allies in improving this territory's educational opportunities. However, I respect your decision and your dedication to the town children. In fact, I'd like to support that dedication. Please accept the enclosed funds as a donation to your school, enough to build a proper facility and purchase supplies for the next year. I only ask one thing in return: stay focused on teaching. Leave matters of land, water, and business to those of us with the experience to handle them properly. A young woman like yourself shouldn't have to worry about such complicated affairs. Your servant, Victor Hale. Attached to the letter was a bank draft for $500. Clara stared at the number, her mind reeling. $500 could build a real school, could buy books, slates, proper desks, could pay her salary for a year with money left over, could give her students everything they deserved and more. All she had to do was stay quiet, stay out of the war, let powerful men destroy each other while she focused on teaching children. It was a bribe dressed as charity, a threat wrapped in generosity, and it was the smartest move Hale could have made. "What are you going to do?" Margaret asked quietly. Clara looked at the bank draft, at the promise of everything she'd wanted when she came to Red Hollow. Safety, purpose, a life that mattered without being dangerous. Then she walked to the small stove in the corner of her room, struck a match, and set the paper on fire. She held it until the flames licked her fingers, watching $500 turn to ash. Then she dropped it in the wash basin and watched it burn down to nothing. "I'm going to teach Hale the same lesson I teach my students," she said, "that some things can't be bought, and some people refuse to be scared." Margaret stared at the ashes, then started laughing, that same rusty, surprised sound from before. "You're completely insane." "Probably. And you're definitely going to get yourself killed." "Maybe." Clara sat on the bed beside her, suddenly feeling every mile she'd ridden and every word she'd spoken tonight. "But I'll die standing up instead of kneeling down. And right now, that's the only thing I'm sure of." Margaret put an arm around her shoulders, brief, awkward, but genuine. "Then I suppose I'd better make sure you survive long enough to regret this decision. Come on, let's get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be difficult." She was right about that. Tomorrow Clara would find out just how difficult choosing a side could be, and just how far Victor Hale was willing to go to win. The new schoolhouse rose from the dirt like an act of defiance. Margaret's building committee worked from dawn until dark for 4 days straight, hammering and sawing and arguing over every board. It wasn't fancy, just 4 solid walls, a proper roof, and windows with actual glass. But it was real. It was permanent. And when Clara stood in the doorway on that 4th evening, watching the last nails go in, she felt something dangerously close to hope. That feeling lasted exactly 12 hours. She woke to shouting in the street. The sky outside her window was still dark, but there was an orange glow on the horizon that didn't belong to dawn. Clara grabbed her shawl and ran downstairs to find Margaret already outside staring toward the east. "What is it?" Clara asked. "Fire." Margaret's voice was hollow. "The Henderson Ranch. That's Tom Henderson's place, about 8 miles out." Clara remembered Henderson from the meeting at Creed's ranch, a quiet man in his 60s who'd spoken maybe 3 words all evening. He'd been one of the ranchers refusing to sell to Hale. "Is anyone going to help?" "Help with what? By the time anyone gets there, it'll be gone." Margaret's hands clenched in her apron. "This is the 3rd fire this month. First was old Murphy's barn. They said it was lightning, but there hadn't been a storm. Then the line shack on Creed's northern property. Now Henderson's whole ranch." She turned to look at Clara. "This is Hale's answer to your burned bank draft. He's escalating." Clara watched the orange glow spread across the horizon and felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd known burning the money would have consequences. She just hadn't thought those consequences would include other people's homes. By morning, the news was all over town. Henderson's ranch house had burned to the foundation. The family got out alive, but everything else was gone. Livestock scattered, winter supplies destroyed, a lifetime of work reduced to ash. Henderson himself had ridden into Red Hollow at dawn, his face blackened with soot, his eyes empty. Clara found him sitting outside the saloon, staring at nothing. Mr. Henderson, she said quietly, I'm so sorry. He looked up at her with an expression that made her step back. You're the school teacher, the one who's been helping Creed. Yes. Then this is your fault as much as his. His voice was flat, emotionless. Hale sent word this morning. Said if I'd sold when he first offered, my family would still have a home. Said every rancher who stands with Creed is going to end up the same way. Burned out or dead. Mr. Henderson, I'm selling. Whatever Hale wants to pay, I'm taking it. He stood, swaying slightly. You tell Creed that. Tell him Tom Henderson's done fighting. Some of us got families to think about. He walked into the saloon before Clara could respond. She stood alone on the street, feeling the weight of his words like stones in her chest. This was her fault. Maybe not directly, maybe not entirely, but her choice to stay and fight had helped draw the battle lines, and now people were suffering for it. She was still standing there when Rowan Creed rode into town with 6 of his men. He dismounted in front of the saloon and walked straight to Clara, his face grim. You heard about Henderson, he said. I just spoke with him. He's selling to Hale. I know. He's not the only one. Got word this morning that the Pritchett brothers are selling too, and the widow Carson. Creed's jaw was tight. Hale's using fear the way other men use money, and it's working. What are we going to do? We? He looked at her sharply. There's no we in this anymore, Miss Whitlock. I want you to stay in town, stay visible, keep teaching. Let everyone see that you're just a school teacher who's got nothing to do with range wars and burned ranches. But that's not a request. His voice had gone hard, cold. You've helped enough. You've contributed your ideas, you've refused Hale's bribe, you've made your position clear. Now it's time to step back before someone decides to make an example out of you the way they did Henderson. Clara felt anger flare hot in her chest. You don't get to decide what I do. I do when your choices affect my ability to protect you. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Hale knows you're important to me now. That dance, those meetings at my ranch, the fact that I've got men watching your building, all of that tells him you matter, which means he's going to use you to get to me. The only way to keep you safe is to make it clear you're not involved anymore. And if I don't want to be safe, if I want to finish what I started, then you're a fool. He turned away, then stopped. I lost someone once because I couldn't protect her. I won't do it again. Stay out of this, Clara. Please. It was the first time he'd used her first name. The intimacy of it, combined with the rawness in his voice, hit her harder than any argument could have. But she was done being protected, done being kept safe while other people fought battles that affected her life. No, she said quietly. Creed turned back, his eyes dangerous. What? I said no. I'm not stepping back. I'm not hiding behind the fiction that I'm just a school teacher with no stake in this. Clara moved closer to him, aware of his men watching, aware of the town watching. You asked for my help because I understand how men like Hale operate. Well, I understand this too. He's not going to stop with Henderson. He's going to keep burning and threatening until everyone caves or until you're standing alone. And when that happens, he'll come at you with everything he's got, and you'll lose. Not because you're not strong enough or smart enough, but because you can't fight money and law and fear all by yourself. So what do you suggest? His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. That we all stand together and burn together? I suggest we stop reacting and start planning. Stop letting Hale dictate the terms of this fight. Clara glanced at his men, then back at him. But we can't do that here, in the street, with half the town listening. So either tell me to go to hell and ride away, or let's go somewhere we can actually talk. For a long moment, she thought he might choose the first option. Then he jerked his head toward his horse. You can ride double with me. We're going to my ranch. The ride was tense and silent. Clara sat behind Creed on his massive black horse, her arms around his waist, trying not to think about how close they were or how much she could feel him breathing. His men rode in formation around them, watchful and armed. They didn't go to the main house. Instead, Creed led them to a small cabin set back in the trees, far enough from the ranch proper to be private. He helped Clara down, dismissed his men with a curt nod, and opened the cabin door. Inside was sparse but functional, A table, chairs, a cold fireplace, and walls covered with maps. Clara recognized some of them from the envelope Creed had given her, but these were more detailed, marked with dates and notations in his precise handwriting. "This is where I've been tracking Hale's movements," Creed said, moving to light the fireplace. "Every property he's acquired, every official he's bought, every fire that's been set. Looking for patterns, weaknesses, anything I can use." Clara studied the maps. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. Hale was systematically acquiring every water source in the valley, working from east to west. Creed's ranch sat right in the middle of the western section, the last major obstacle to total control. "He's going to come for you next," she said. "I know." "Then why are we waiting? Why not go to the territorial governor now? Show him this evidence." "Because evidence of a pattern isn't evidence of a crime." Creed poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a bottle on the table. "I can prove Hale's buying up land. I can show that fires keep happening to people who refuse to sell, but I can't prove he's setting those fires. Can't prove he's threatening people. Every witness either recants or disappears before they can testify." "What about Henderson? He just said Hale sent word this morning. That's a direct threat." "Verbal, no witnesses, easily denied." Creed handed her a glass. "Hale's too smart to put anything in writing. Everything goes through intermediaries. By the time you trace it back to him, the chain's broken in 6 different places." Clara sipped the whiskey, thinking. Her father had operated the same way. Layers of distance between himself and anything illegal, always someone else to blame when things went wrong. But her father had made mistakes, gotten careless when he felt secure. Everyone did eventually. "What about his investors?" she asked. "The ones from San Francisco. They're putting up the money, which means they're expecting returns. What happens if those returns don't materialize? They pull their funding and Hale's operation collapses. But why would they do that? From their perspective, everything's going according to plan." "Unless it's not." Clara set down her glass and moved to the maps. "Hale's been telling his investors he's acquiring land legally, right? That he's offering fair compensation, and people are selling willingly?" "That's what his correspondent says. I've seen copies of his reports." "So what happens if those investors show up and see burned ranches, scared families, a town that's terrified of him?" Clara traced the line of acquired properties with her finger. "What happens if someone gives them a tour of the valley and shows them exactly how their money's being spent?" Creed was quiet for a moment. Then, "They'd pull their funding, probably distance themselves from the whole operation to avoid legal consequences. And without funding, Hale can't continue. He's leveraged everything on this valley acquisition. I'd bet my life on it. Men like him always overextend because they're so sure they'll win." Clara turned to face him. "We don't need to prove he's a criminal in court. We just need to prove it to the people who are bankrolling him." "And how do we do that when his investors are in San Francisco and we're here?" "We bring them here. Hale's been promising them a profitable mining operation in a peaceful, cooperative valley. Let's invite them to see their investment in person. Give them a tour they'll never forget." Creed stared at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely surprised. "You want to invite Hale's investors to Red Hollow. I want to show them the truth before Hale can spin it into another lie. I want them to meet Tom Henderson and hear about his burned ranch. I want them to see the town living in fear. I want them to understand that their money is funding terror, not progress." Clara met his eyes, "And I want to do it in a way that Hale can't stop without looking guilty." "He'll never agree to it." "He will if we make it seem like his idea, like he's so confident in his operation that he's inviting oversight." Clara started pacing, her mind racing. What if there was a territorial commission, an official review of land acquisitions in the valley? Hale would have to cooperate or look like he's hiding something. And if that commission just happened to include representatives from his investor group? You're talking about manipulating territorial politics. That takes connections, money, influence we don't have. But the officials at your meeting do have those connections. Patterson might be stubborn, but he's well connected. And there were 2 others there, the thin man with the intelligent eyes and the one who barely spoke. Who are they? Geechee. The thin one is James Cooper, Territorial Land Commissioner. The quiet one is Samuel Rhodes, deputy to the territorial governor. Creed was looking at her with something like admiration now. You're serious about this? I'm serious about winning, and I'm serious about doing it in a way that doesn't get more innocent people burned out of their homes. Clara stopped pacing and faced him fully. But I can't do it alone. I need you to convince those officials to call for a commission. I need access to information about Hale's investors, and I need time, at least 2 weeks, to set this up properly. 2 weeks is a long time. Hale could do a lot of damage in 2 weeks. Then we make sure he's too busy defending himself to go on the offensive. Start filing legal complaints, requesting investigations, making noise. Keep him occupied with putting out small fires so he doesn't have time to set big ones. Creed walked to the window, looking out at his land. Clara watched him, seeing the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the window frame like he was holding himself back from something. This could work, he said finally. It's risky and complicated and depends on a lot of things going right, but it could actually work. So we're doing it? He turned back to her. On one condition, if this goes wrong, if Hale figures out what we're doing and comes after you, you run. You take the money I offered before and you disappear. No arguments, no heroics, just survival. And if it goes right, then we've saved the valley and probably made ourselves permanent enemies of one of the wealthiest men in the territory, but at least we'll have done it together. There was something in the way he said together that made Clara's breath catch. Something that had nothing to do with strategy or survival, and everything to do with the way he was looking at her, like she was someone worth fighting for, not just fighting alongside. Creed? Rowan, he said quietly, if we're going to do this, you should call me Rowan. Rowan. The name felt strange on her tongue, intimate. What happens after? If we win? I don't know. I haven't thought past winning in so long, I'm not sure I remember how. He moved closer to her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. What about you? What happens to the school teacher who burned $500 and started a war? I teach, Clara said. I build something that lasts. I prove that education matters more than fear. She paused. And maybe I stop running from the person I used to be and figure out who I want to become. And who's that? I don't know yet, but I think I'm starting to find out. Rowan reached out slowly, giving her time to step back. When she didn't, his hand cupped her face with surprising gentleness. His palm was rough, calloused, warm against her skin. I shouldn't do this, he said. Probably not. It's going to complicate everything. Everything's already complicated. I'm not good at this. At being close to someone, at letting anyone in. Neither am I. Clara put her hand over his where it rested against her cheek. But maybe that's why we understand each other. He kissed her then, soft at first, almost tentative, like he'd forgotten how, and was remembering as he went. Clara responded without thinking, without the fear and calculation that had governed every intimate moment of her marriage. This was different. This was choosing instead of enduring. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. This is a terrible idea, he said. The worst, Clara agreed. We should focus on the plan, on beating Hale. Nothing else matters until that's done. You're absolutely right. Neither of them moved. Then Rowan stepped back, his expression carefully neutral again, all the warmth locked away behind the walls he'd spent 10 years building. I'll contact Cooper and Rhodes, set up a meeting to discuss the commission. You work on getting information about Hale's investors, names, addresses, how much they've invested. How am I supposed to get that? I don't know. You're the one who's good at thinking. He managed a slight smile. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Clara did figure it out, though it took some doing. The answer came from an unexpected source, Victor Hale himself. 3 days after her conversation with Rowan, Clara received another letter. This one was delivered to the schoolhouse by a boy she didn't recognize, who vanished before she could ask questions. The letter was short. Miss Whitlock, I understand you declined my previous offer of funding. I respect your independence, though I believe it's misguided. However, I remain committed to improving educational opportunities in Red Hollow. To that end, I'd like to invite you to dinner at my residence this Saturday evening. Several of my investors from San Francisco will be visiting, and I believe you'd find their perspectives on territorial development enlightening. They're educated people who understand the value of progress. I've taken the liberty of arranging transportation. A carriage will collect you at 6 o'clock. Your servant, Victor Hale Clara, read the letter 3 times, looking for the trap. It was there. It had to be. Men like Hale didn't invite their enemies to dinner unless they had an angle. But it was also an opportunity, a chance to meet the investors, assess them, maybe even plant seeds of doubt about Hale's methods. She showed the letter to Margaret that evening. "It's a trap," Margaret said immediately. "I know." "Then you're not going." "I have to. This is exactly what we need. Access to the investors, a chance to see how Hale presents his operation, information I can use later." Clara folded the letter carefully. "Besides, it would look suspicious if I refused. I'm supposed to be just a school teacher, remember? School teachers don't turn down dinner invitations from wealthy benefactors." School teachers also don't usually get burned out or shot for accepting them. Margaret's face was drawn. "What does Creed think?" "I haven't told him yet." "Clara, because he'll tell me not to go, and I'm going anyway, so there's no point in arguing about it beforehand." Clara met Margaret's eyes. "I can handle myself. I've dealt with men like Hale my entire life. I know how to smile and nod and play the part they expect while watching for weaknesses. And if he sees through it, then I leave. I'm not stupid enough to think I can outmaneuver him on his own territory, but I am smart enough to gather information before he realizes that's what I'm doing." Margaret sighed. "You're going to get yourself killed, and then I'm going to have to explain to Creed why I let you, and he's going to shoot me." "He's not going to shoot you." "He might. The man's clearly gone soft where you're concerned, which means he's capable of all kinds of irrationality." Clara felt her face heat. "He hasn't gone soft." "Please, I've seen the way he looks at you, like you're water, and he's been walking through the desert for 10 years. Margaret shook her head. "Just promise me you'll be careful, and take that little pistol of yours." "I promise." Saturday came too quickly. Clara dressed carefully. Her best dress, dark green with minimal adornment, her hair pinned up in a style that was respectable but not fancy. She looked like a school teacher trying to make a good impression, which was exactly the image she wanted to project. The pistol went into her reticule, small and heavy and reassuring. Rowan appeared at Margaret's store 20 minutes before the carriage was due to arrive. He took one look at Clara's dress, and his expression darkened. "You're going to Hale's dinner," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Alone." "That's what the invitation specified." "Then you're not going." He said it with absolute certainty, like his word was law. Clara felt her temper spike. "I'm not asking your permission. I don't care if you're asking or not. You're not walking into Hale's residence alone. It's suicide. It's strategy. His investors are going to be there, the same investors we need to turn against him. This is our chance to assess them, figure out who's worth approaching, who might be sympathetic." Clara crossed her arms. "I know it's dangerous. I'm going anyway." "No, you're not. You don't get to tell me what to do." "I do when you're making idiotic decisions that could get you killed." They were standing in the store's main room, voices rising, both too angry to care that Margaret was listening from behind the counter. Clara felt 3 months of running and hiding and biting her tongue boil over into something sharp and hot. "I spent 3 years with a man who told me what to do," she said, her voice shaking. "What to wear, who to talk to, when to speak and when to shut my mouth. I left that life behind. I'm not stepping back into it, not even for you." Rowan's jaw was tight enough to break. "This isn't about control. This is about keeping you alive. No, this is about you being scared, scared that something will happen to me the way something happened to your wife. But I'm not her, Rowan. I'm not someone who needs to be locked away and protected. I'm someone who knows how to fight, and I'm choosing to fight." Clara stepped closer to him. "So you can either trust me to handle this, or you can walk away. But you don't get to tell me no." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Rowan stared at her with an expression Clara couldn't read, anger and fear and something that might have been respect all tangled together. "Fine," he said finally. "Go to Hale's dinner. Smile and nod and gather your information, but you're not going completely alone." The invitation said, "I don't care what the invitation said. I'll have men stationed around Hale's property. You won't see them, but they'll be there. And if anything goes wrong, if you feel threatened at all, you find a way to signal them. Understood?" Clara wanted to argue, to insist she didn't need guards, but the fear in his eyes stopped her. This wasn't about control. It was about a man who'd lost someone and was terrified of losing again. "Understood," she said quietly. He nodded once, then turned and left without another word. Clara watched him go, feeling the weight of everything unsaid between them. "That man is in love with you," Margaret observed from behind the counter. "Don't be ridiculous." "I'm not. And unless I'm very wrong, you're in love with him too." Margaret came around the counter, her expression unusually gentle. "Which makes what you're about to do even more dangerous, because love makes people stupid, and stupid gets you killed." "I'm not in love with him." "Keep telling yourself that. Maybe you'll believe it eventually." Margaret squeezed her shoulder. "Go to your dinner, gather your information. But remember, men like Hale don't invite enemies to their table unless they're planning to poison the food, metaphorically or otherwise." The carriage arrived exactly at 6. It was expensive, well-maintained, pulled by matched horses that probably cost more than Clara's entire wardrobe. The driver helped her in without a word, and they set off toward the east side of the valley. Hale's residence was less a house and more a compound, a massive stone structure surrounded by manicured grounds that looked absurdly out of place in the rough frontier landscape. Clara counted at least 6 guards visible from the road, which meant there were probably twice that many she couldn't see. She was escorted inside by a butler in formal attire, through rooms decorated with furniture that had clearly been shipped from San Francisco at enormous expense. Everything screamed wealth and civilization, a deliberate contrast to the rough frontier town a few miles away. Victor Hale waited in a sitting room with 3 other men. He rose when Clara entered, his smile warm and seemingly genuine. "Miss Whitlock, thank you for accepting my invitation. Gentlemen, allow me to introduce Clara Whitlock, Red Hollow's dedicated schoolteacher." He gestured to the other men. "Miss Whitlock, these are my business associates from San Francisco, Mr. Edmund Porter, Mr. James Whitfield, and Mr. Charles Donovan." Clara studied them as she exchanged pleasantries. Porter was elderly and distinguished, with the bearing of old money. Whitfield was younger, sharp-eyed, clearly the numbers man. Donovan was somewhere in between, affable but watchful. They made small talk over sherry. The investors asked polite questions about her school, her students, her impressions of the territory. Clara played her part, earnest, slightly overwhelmed by the opulence, grateful for Hale's interest in education. All the while she watched and listened, noted that Porter deferred to Whitfield on business matters, that Donovan asked the most questions about the valley's development, that all 3 seemed genuinely unaware of the violence and coercion that had been used to acquire land. They believed Hale's version of events. They thought they were investing in progress. Dinner was elaborate. 6 courses, fine wine, conversation that ranged from territorial politics to San Francisco society to the future of Western expansion. Clara contributed carefully, never too much, always aware that she was being assessed as much as she was assessing. It was during the 4th course that Hale made his move. "I've been thinking about your school, Miss Whitlock," he said, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. "The new building is adequate, but surely you could do more with proper funding. I'd like to make a proposition." Here it comes, Clara thought. What kind of proposition? My associates here represent a company that values education and community development. They're considering establishing a foundation to support schools throughout the territory. With your experience and dedication, you'd be an ideal candidate to oversee such a program. Hale smiled. Of course, that would require you to step back from day-to-day teaching and focus on administration. We'd provide a generous salary, an office in San Francisco, influence over educational policy across multiple territories. It was brilliant. Offer her everything she might want, power, money, prestige, while removing her from Red Hollow entirely. And do it in front of witnesses who would remember she'd been offered legitimate opportunities, not bribes. That's very generous, Clara said carefully. But I'm committed to my students here. They need consistency, not another teacher abandoning them for better prospects. Admirable, Porter said, but perhaps short-sighted. You could help hundreds of children instead of just a handful. Or I could help the handful that no one else cares about. Clara met Hale's eyes across the table. I didn't come to Red Hollow to build a career, Mr. Hale. I came to make a difference. And I think that difference is more valuable here, with children everyone else has written off, than in an office in San Francisco managing programs I'd never see. The temperature in the room dropped slightly. Hale's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his eyes. Of course, he said smoothly, though I wonder if you've fully considered the challenges ahead. Red Hollow is a rough town in a difficult time. There are competing interests. That could make stability difficult to maintain. You mean the conflict over water rights, Clara said. I'm aware of it. Then you understand that some degree of consolidation is necessary for the territory to progress. Small, independent operations simply can't compete with modern industrial methods. It's evolution, Miss Whitlock. Unfortunate for those who can't adapt, but necessary for the greater good. And if those small operations don't want to be absorbed, if they prefer independence to progress, then they're standing in the way of the future. And the future, I'm afraid, has a way of moving forward with or without individual consent. Hale's smile had gone cold now. Surely you understand that, coming from St. Louis. Your father was Samuel Hartwell, wasn't he? Quite the businessman, from what I understand. Clara's blood turned to ice. She'd used her mother's maiden name, Whitlock, specifically to avoid being connected to her father. If Hale knew who she was, knew where she came from, he'd done deep research, which meant he'd been planning this conversation long before tonight. My father and I aren't close, she said, keeping her voice steady. No, I imagine not. Especially after that unfortunate business with your husband. Thomas Hartwell, his associate, wasn't he? I understand there was quite the scandal when you left. Something about a gun and threats? Hale tilted his head. It must be difficult carrying that kind of history, always wondering if it might catch up with you. The threat was clear. Hale had information that could destroy what little reputation she'd built in Red Hollow, could paint her as unstable, dangerous, a woman who'd threatened her husband with a weapon. Never mind that Thomas had been beating her for years. Never mind that she'd only pointed an empty gun at him to make him stop. In the court of public opinion, she'd be the villain. Is there a point to this? Clara asked quietly. Only that we all have pasts we'd prefer to keep private. And sometimes the best way to protect those pasts is to accept help when it's offered. Hale gestured to the three investors who were watching the exchange with varying degrees of discomfort. My associates are prepared to offer you that administrative position regardless of your personal history. All you need to do is say yes and leave Red Hollow behind. Start fresh, with no complications and no questions asked. It was a masterful play. Offer her escape from her past while simultaneously threatening to expose it if she refused. And do it in front of witnesses who'd think he was being generous, not coercive. Clara thought about the pistol in her reticule. Thought about Rowan's men stationed outside. Thought about every choice that had led her to this moment. Leaving St. Louis, coming to Red Hollow, refusing Hale's first offer, choosing to fight instead of hide. Then she stood up, setting her napkin on the table with deliberate precision. Thank you for dinner, Mr. Hale, and thank you for the offer, but I'm afraid my answer is still no. She looked at each of the investors in turn. Gentlemen, I hope you'll take the time to tour the valley while you're here. Visit Red Hollow, talk to the people, see what your investment is actually building. I think you'll find it illuminating. That won't be necessary, Hale said, his voice sharp. I've provided them with comprehensive reports. I'm sure you have. But there's a difference between reports and reality, isn't there? Clara picked up her reticule. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I'll find my own way home. The walk will do me good. She made it to the door before Hale spoke again. You're making a mistake, Miss Whitlock. A very dangerous mistake. Clara turned back. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. And I'd rather make mistakes on my own terms than live safely on someone else's. She walked out before he could respond. Through the opulent rooms and out into the night. Her heart was pounding, her hands shaking with adrenaline and fear, but she kept walking. She made it halfway down the long drive before a figure stepped out of the shadows. Clara's hand went to her reticule, reaching for the pistol. "Easy," a familiar voice said. "It's just me." Rowan materialized from the darkness, his expression grim. "I told my men to signal if you left early. What happened?" "Hale knows who I am, where I'm from, what I did before I came here." Clara's voice was shaking now, all the control she'd maintained through dinner finally cracking. "He threatened to expose me if I didn't take his job offer and leave town." "And what did you say?" "I said no, then I walked out." Clara laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "I probably just made everything worse. He's going to come after me now, after you, after everyone, and I couldn't sit there and let him win." Rowan pulled her against him without a word. Clara let herself lean into his strength, just for a moment, breathing in the smell of leather and smoke and safety. "You did the right thing," he said quietly, "and you're not facing this alone. Not anymore." They stood like that in the darkness, two people who'd spent years running from their pasts, holding on to each other while the future rushed toward them like a wildfire. And in Victor Hale's mansion, behind expensive windows and carefully cultivated lies, three investors from San Francisco began asking questions their host didn't want to answer. The war was about to enter its final phase, and this time, Clara and Rowan would face it together, whatever the cost. The night after the dinner, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed listening to the sounds of Red Hollow settling into uneasy quiet, replaying every word of the conversation with Hale, looking for mistakes she'd made and opportunities she'd missed. The threat he'd made wasn't subtle. He knew everything about her past, which meant he could destroy her present anytime he chose. Margaret found her in the kitchen before dawn, heating water for coffee. "You look terrible, Wyatt," Margaret said. "Thank you. That's exactly what I needed to hear." "I'm not trying to be kind. I'm trying to be honest." Margaret pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. "Hale's going to move against you now. You embarrassed him in front of his investors, refused his offers twice, made it clear you're not scared of him. Men like that don't forgive." "I know." Clara poured 2 cups of coffee, her hand steadier than she felt. "But what was I supposed to do? Take his job and abandon everything I've built here?" Some people would say yes, would say survival matters more than pride. "And what do you say?" Margaret wrapped her hands around the cup, staring into the dark liquid. "I say you did what I would have done 30 years ago, before this town beat the fight out of me. And I say I'm proud of you for it, even though it's probably going to get us both killed." Clara managed a weak smile. "That's the most depressing compliment I've ever received." "Get used to disappointment. It's a specialty around here." Margaret took a sip of coffee and grimaced. "Rowan came by last night after he brought you back. Wanted to know if you were safe, if you needed anything. I told him you were fine and to stop hovering like a mother hen." "What did he say?" "Nothing. Just gave me that look he does when he's trying not to show he's worried, then rode off." Margaret studied Clara over the rim of her cup. "You two are getting close." It wasn't a question. Clara didn't bother denying it. "Is that a problem?" "Depends on whether you're planning to survive this or not. Getting attached to people makes running harder." Margaret set down her cup. "I saw what happened to his wife, saw what it did to him. If something happens to you because of this fight with Hale, I don't think he'll come back from it this time. Then I'll make sure nothing happens to me." "That's not how life works, Clara. You can't just decide to survive and make it so." "Watch me." Margaret laughed, that same rusty sound, and shook her head. "Stubborn fool. You're going to fit right in here, assuming you live long enough." The next morning brought unexpected news. One of Hale's investors, Charles Donovan, showed up in Red Hollow asking questions. Clara was teaching when she saw him through the schoolhouse window, walking down the main street with the careful attention of someone taking inventory. She dismissed the children early and found him standing outside the general store, talking to Margaret. "Miss Whitlock," he said when he saw her, "I was hoping to speak with you." "Mr. Donovan, what brings you to town?" "Curiosity, mostly. You suggested we see the valley for ourselves, and I thought that was sound advice. He glanced around the dusty street with its rough buildings and rougher inhabitants. Mr. Hale painted quite a different picture of this place. I'm sure he did. Would you like to see the school? They walked back to the schoolhouse, Donovan taking in every detail. Clara showed him the building that had been erected in 4 days by volunteers, explained about the previous structure being destroyed, demonstrated how she taught with minimal supplies and maximum determination. How many students? Donovan asked. 14 now. Started with 7. Hoping for more once people see that education doesn't make their children soft, just gives them options. And Hale offered to fund all of this? He offered to fund something. I'm not entirely sure it would have been the same thing. Clara leaned against one of the desks. Can I ask you something honestly, Mr. Donovan? Please. Do you know how Hale's been acquiring the land you're investing in? Donovan was quiet for a moment. I know he's been offering compensation to ranchers and they've been selling. Compensation after their ranches burn down, after their livestock dies, after they're too scared to say no. Clara met his eyes. Tom Henderson lost everything he'd built in 40 years. The Pritchett brothers sold for pennies on the dollar after someone shot at their youngest son. The widow Carson signed over her deed with a gun to her head. That's not business, Mr. Donovan. That's extortion with a smile. Those are serious accusations. They're true. And if you care about where your money's going and what it's building, you'll look into them properly instead of trusting Hale's reports. Donovan studied her with those sharp eyes. Why are you telling me this? For all you know, I could go straight to Hale. You could, but I don't think you will. You asked questions at dinner that the others didn't. You're here in town instead of taking Hale's word for how things are. That tells me you're not comfortable with something, even if you haven't admitted it to yourself yet. Clara straightened. I'm telling you because someone needs to know the truth, and because I think you might actually care about doing the right thing, not just making a profit. He was quiet for a long time, then, I'd like to speak with some of these ranchers. Henderson, the Pritchetts, would you be willing to arrange meetings? Yes, but not here. Hale has eyes everywhere in town. If people see you talking to them, he'll know within hours. Where then? Clara thought about Rowan's ranch, the cabin where they'd planned their strategy. I know a place. Tomorrow afternoon. Can you get away from Hale's residence without him knowing? I'll manage. Donovan offered his hand. Thank you, Miss Whitlock. For your honesty, if nothing else. They shook, and Clara felt the first real spark of hope since this whole mess began. If they could turn even one investor, create doubt among Hale's backers, it might be enough to stop the funding that made his operation possible. She found Rowan that evening at his ranch, in the same cabin where they'd kissed. He was bent over his maps when she arrived, making new notations in his precise handwriting. Donovan came to town today, she said without preamble. One of Hale's investors. He wants to talk to Henderson and the Pritchetts, hear their stories directly. Rowan looked up sharply. When? Tomorrow afternoon. I told him I'd arrange it. Can we use this cabin? If he's willing to ride out here without Hale knowing, yes. Rowan set down his pen. This could be exactly what we need. If Donovan believes them, if he takes that information back to the other investors. They might pull their funding. I know. That's why I set it up. Clara moved to the table, looking at the maps. What are you working on? Trying to figure out Hale's next move. He's been quiet since your dinner, which makes me nervous. Quiet usually means planning. Or regrouping. I embarrassed him in front of his investors. He can't move openly against me now without looking vindictive. He doesn't need to move openly. Fire doesn't ask permission, and bullets don't care about appearances. Rowan's jaw tightened. I've doubled patrols around your building and the school, got men watching every approach to town. If Hale tries something, we'll know. You can't protect me forever. I can try. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw the fear he was trying to hide. You walked into his house alone, faced him down, came out alive. Most people wouldn't have managed that. I'm not most people. No, you're not. Rowan moved around the table until he was standing close enough to touch. You're stubborn and reckless and far too brave for your own good. And I'm terrified that one of these days your courage is going to get you killed. Would you rather I was afraid, rather I hid? I'd rather you were safe, but I'm starting to understand that safety and you don't occupy the same space. His hand came up to cup her face, the gesture becoming familiar now. What happened at that dinner, Clara? Really happened. You came out shaking. She'd been avoiding thinking about it, avoiding the fear that had clawed at her throat when Hale mentioned her father, her husband, the gun. But Rowan deserved the truth. He knows everything, she said quietly. About my father's business, my marriage, why I left St. Louis. He threatened to expose it all if I didn't leave town. What did you do before you left? Clara pulled back, wrapping her arms around herself. You mean, what was I running from? I mean, what happened that made you run? I'm not judging, Clara. I just want to know. She walked to the window, staring out at the darkness. My husband's name was Thomas Hartwell. He worked for my father, which is how we met. He was charming, educated, from a good family. Everything a proper St. Louis girl was supposed to want. Her laugh was bitter. It took me 3 months to realize the charm was an act. Another year to understand that the bruises weren't accidents. By the time I accepted that he enjoyed hurting me, I was trapped. Divorce wasn't an option. My father wouldn't allow the scandal. Leaving meant giving up everything. But you left anyway. Eventually, after he broke my arm and told everyone I'd fallen down the stairs. After I realized he was going to kill me one day, probably make it look like another accident, and no one would question it. Clara's hands clenched against the windowsill. I took his pistol one night while he was drunk, made sure it was empty. Then I pointed it at his head and pulled the trigger 6 times while he begged and cried and promised he'd change. Rowan didn't say anything, just listened. I wanted to scare him the way he'd scared me. Wanted him to know what it felt like to think you're about to die and be completely powerless to stop it. Clara's voice cracked. Then I packed a bag and left. Used my mother's maiden name, bought a ticket west, and didn't look back. I thought if I ran far enough, fast enough, I could leave that person behind. The woman who'd married a monster, the woman who'd almost killed a man just to feel powerful for once. You didn't pull the trigger. I wanted to. That's what scares me. I knew the gun was empty, but there was a moment, just a moment, where I wished it wasn't. Where I wanted him dead and was angry at myself for being too much of a coward to actually load it. She turned to face Rowan. That's who I am. That's what I'm running from. Not just my past, but the person I became in that marriage. The person who's capable of violence when she's pushed far enough. Rowan crossed the room and took her hands, forcing her to look at him. You know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who survived. Someone who found the strength to leave an impossible situation. Someone who's built something real and good despite having every reason to give up. His grip tightened. You pointed an empty gun at a man who was beating you, and you think that makes you a monster? Clara, that makes you human. It makes you someone who refused to die quietly. Hale's going to tell everyone about my father, my marriage, the gun. He's going to paint me as unstable, dangerous. And people will believe him because that's what people do. Then we beat him before he gets the chance. Rowan's voice was firm, certain. Donovan's meeting tomorrow is the first step. We get his support, turn the investors against Hale, cut off his funding. Without money, his whole operation collapses. And if that doesn't work, then we find another way, and another after that. We keep fighting until we win or until there's nothing left to fight for. He pulled her closer. But we do it together. No more secrets, no more running. Just us against whatever comes next. Clara leaned her forehead against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong. When did you become an optimist? About 5 minutes after you walked into my life and refused to be scared of me. She felt him smile against her hair. Turns out hope's contagious. Who knew? The meeting the next day almost didn't happen. Donovan showed up on time, but Henderson refused to come. I'm done, Henderson said when Rowan rode out to convince him. Sold my land to Hale yesterday, taking my family and leaving the territory. Whatever you're planning, count me out. Tom, please, just talk to the man. Tell him what happened. Why? So Hale can burn down whatever new place I find? So my wife can keep waking up screaming about fires? Henderson shook his head. I'm sorry, Creed, but I got nothing left to give to this fight. You want a witness? Find someone who's got less to lose than me." He shut the door in Rowan's face. But the Pritchett brothers came, and so did the widow Carson and two other ranchers who'd been pressured into selling. They sat in Rowan's cabin and told their stories to Charles Donovan while Clara took notes and Rowan watched from the corner. The stories were remarkably similar: offers that were initially refused, accidents that followed, fires, dead livestock, damaged equipment, visits from Hale's men with implied threats, then new offers, lower than before, with the clear message that refusal meant worse consequences. Every rancher had sold because they were terrified, not because they wanted to. Donovan listened without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with each account. When the last rancher finished, he sat back in his chair and rubbed his face. "This is nothing like what Hale represented to us," he said finally. "Nothing. He told us the acquisitions were willing sales, that people were eager to sell to a well-funded operation. He made it sound like progress everyone wanted." "It's progress built on fear," Clara said, "and the people paying the price are the ones with no power to stop it. I need to discuss this with Porter and Whitfield, show them evidence, get them to see what I'm seeing." Donovan stood, looking troubled. "But I have to warn you, even if all three of us pull our funding, Hale's got enough capital of his own to continue for months. And he'll be furious when he realizes we've turned against him." "Let him be furious," Rowan said. "Angry men make mistakes, and we only need one mistake to bring him down." Donovan left with a promise to contact them within 2 days. The ranchers dispersed, heading back to whatever pieces of their lives remained. Clara and Rowan stood in the cabin doorway, watching the sun set over the valley that had become a battlefield. "Do you think he'll convince them?" Clara asked. "I think he'll try. Whether Porter and Whitfield listen is another question." Rowan's arms settled around her shoulders, casual and comfortable. "But we've done what we can. Now we wait." They didn't have to wait long. The next morning, Clara was teaching when one of Rowan's men burst into the schoolhouse. "Fire!" he gasped. "Creed's ranch, the main house." Clara's blood turned to ice. "When?" "Started maybe 30 minutes ago. Creed sent me to get you, said you'd want to know." She dismissed the children and ran for the horse she'd borrowed from Margaret's stable. The ride to Rowan's ranch felt like it took hours instead of the 40 minutes it actually was. By the time she arrived, smoke was visible from a mile away, thick, black, angry. The main house was fully engulfed. Rowan's men had formed bucket lines from the well, trying to save the outbuildings, but the house itself was lost. Clara dismounted and found Rowan standing far enough back to be safe, but close enough to watch everything he owned burn. His face was blank, completely, terrifyingly blank. "Rowan," she said quietly. "They waited until I was checking the northern fence line. Waited until most of my men were with me. Then they set it on fire and rode off before anyone could stop them." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Saw them leaving. 3 men on horseback, heading east toward Hale's property. Did you recognize them?" "Does it matter? Hale sent them, whether I recognize their faces or not." He turned to look at her, and Clara saw something in his eyes that made her step back. "He's escalating. First Henderson's ranch, now mine. He's making it clear that refusing to sell means losing everything. You can rebuild." "Can I? Or is this how it ends? Me standing here watching everything burn the way I did 10 years ago, helpless to stop it?" His hands clenched into fists. "I should have killed him when I had the chance. Should have put a bullet in him before it came to this." "You're not a murderer, Rowan. Maybe I should be. Maybe that's what it takes to win this." Clara moved in front of him, forcing him to look at her instead of the fire. "Listen to me. Hale wants you to do something stupid. He wants you so angry you forget to think, forget to plan, forget everything except revenge. That's how he wins, by making you the monster everyone already thinks you are. I am a monster. I've killed men for less than this." "You've killed men who were trying to kill you. That's different from murder, and you know it." She grabbed his arms. "We're winning, Rowan. Donovan believes us. He's going to convince the other investors to pull their funding. If we can just hold on a little longer, stay smart instead of violent, we can beat Hale without you becoming the thing you hate. And if I don't want to be smart anymore, if I just want to burn his house the way he's burned mine, then you lose me." The words came out before Clara could stop them. Because I didn't survive one violent man just to watch another one. I care about destroy himself out of rage. You want revenge? Fine. But get it the right way, by making him lose everything that matters to him the way he's trying to make you lose everything. Don't give him the satisfaction of proving he was right about you. Rowan stared at her, breathing hard. Then he pulled her against him so roughly it almost hurt, burying his face in her hair. I can't lose you too, he said, his voice breaking. I can't watch someone else I care about die because I wasn't strong enough, or smart enough, or fast enough to save them. Then don't lose me. Stay with me. Choose thinking over killing. Clara held on to him just as tightly. Please. They stood like that while the house burned to its foundation, two people who'd lost too much already, holding on to each other like it was the only thing keeping them upright. When the fire finally burned itself out, Rowan let her go and walked to where his foreman Webb stood. Get the men together, he said, his voice steady now. I want guards doubled on all the property. No one goes anywhere alone. And send someone to town. I want every piece of evidence we've collected against Hale brought here. If he wants a war, we'll give him one, but we'll fight it with paper and witnesses instead of bullets. You sure about that, boss? Webb looked skeptical. No, but I'm going to try anyway. Rowan glanced at Clara. Sometimes the people we care about make us better than we want to be. Clara spent the next 2 days helping Rowan organize everything they had on Hale: testimony from ranchers, records of suspicious fires, copies of territorial land documents that showed the pattern of acquisitions. It wasn't enough for a criminal trial, not yet, but it was enough to show Hale's investors that their money was funding something far darker than legitimate business. On the third day, Charles Donovan returned. He brought Porter and Whitfield with him. They met in the cabin again, the three investors on one side of the table, Clara and Rowan on the other. Donovan laid out what he'd learned, showed them the testimony he'd collected. Porter looked increasingly uncomfortable. Whitfield's expression was carefully neutral. These are serious allegations, Porter said when Donovan finished. They're facts, Clara corrected. Documented, corroborated facts. Nevertheless, we can't simply pull our funding based on verbal testimony and circumstantial evidence. We have contracts, legal obligations. You have moral obligations, Rowan interrupted. To not finance terror. To not profit from other people's suffering. We also have fiduciary obligations to our shareholders, Whitfield said coolly. Walking away from this investment would cost us significantly. Less than it'll cost when this goes public, Clara said. And it will go public. We're filing a formal complaint with the territorial governor. We're requesting an official investigation into Hale's land acquisitions. When that happens, every newspaper in the territory is going to write about it. Your names are on the investment documents. Your money is funding his operation. When people find out what Hale's been doing, they're going to ask who enabled him to do it. That got their attention. Whitfield's eyes narrowed. Porter shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Are you threatening us? Whitfield asked. I'm offering you a choice, Clara said. Pull your funding now. Distance yourselves from Hale's methods. Cooperate with the investigation. Or wait until you're legally implicated and watch your reputations destroyed along with his. Either way, the truth is coming out. You just get to decide which side of it you want to be on. Silence filled the cabin. The three investors looked at each other, having an entire conversation without words. Finally, Porter cleared his throat. We'll need to review our contracts, consult with our attorneys. But assuming we can extract ourselves legally, what guarantees do we have that this information won't be used against us? None, Rowan said flatly. But you have my word that if you cooperate, if you help us build a case against Hale, we won't go out of our way to drag your names through the mud. That's the best I can offer. More silence. Then Donovan spoke. I'm pulling my investment regardless. I don't need to review contracts or consult attorneys. I'm not financing this anymore. He looked at his associates. I'd strongly suggest you do the same. Our reputations might survive being duped by Hale. They won't survive being complicit. It was Whitfield who broke first. I'll need 48 hours to arrange the paperwork. But yes, I'm out. Porter took longer, his internal struggle visible on his face. Finally, he nodded. As am I, though I want assurances in writing that we're cooperating fully with any investigation. You'll have them, Clara said. The meeting ended with handshakes and promises. As the three investors rode away, Clara allowed herself to feel something that might have been victory. We did it, she said quietly. We did something, Rowan corrected. Whether it's enough to stop Hale remains to be seen. He was right to be cautious. 2 days later, Victor Hale showed up in Red Hollow with a dozen armed men. They rode down the main street at noon when everyone could see them and stopped in front of the schoolhouse. Clara was inside with her students when she heard the commotion. She looked out the window and felt her stomach drop. Children, she said, keeping her voice calm, I need you all to leave through the back door and go straight home. Don't stop. Don't look back. Go. They obeyed, frightened but quick. Clara waited until they were gone, then walked outside to face Hale. He sat on his horse like a king surveying conquered territory. His men flanked him, hands resting casually on their holstered weapons. The message was clear. Miss Whitlock, Hale said pleasantly, we need to talk. Then talk. You don't need an army to have a conversation. Don't I? You've been quite busy lately, poisoning my investors against me, spreading lies about my business practices, filing complaints with territorial officials. His smile was cold. I'm impressed, really. For a school teacher, you've got remarkable skill at manipulation. I told the truth. If that damaged your reputation, maybe your reputation deserved it. The truth is whatever people believe, Miss Whitlock, and right now people are starting to believe some very troubling things about you, about your past, your marriage, your mental state. Hale leaned forward in his saddle. It would be a shame if those troubling things became common knowledge, if the parents of your students learned that their children's teacher threatened a man with a loaded weapon, that she fled St. Louis one step ahead of legal consequences. Clara felt the trap closing but kept her voice steady. The gun wasn't loaded. Are you sure? Because I have testimony from your husband saying otherwise, saying you tried to kill him, that he barely escaped with his life, saying you're dangerous and unstable and should never be allowed near children. Hale's smile widened. Of course, I don't have to share that testimony. I could keep it private. All you have to do is leave Red Hollow. Today, right now, get on a stage and disappear. And if I don't? Then by tomorrow morning, everyone in this territory will know exactly who Clara Whitlock really is. Your students will be pulled from your school, your teaching position will be terminated, and Rowan Creed will realize that the woman he's been protecting is a liar who's been using him from the start. It was brilliantly vicious. Hale had found her weakest point, her past, her shame, her fear of being exposed as something other than the respectable teacher she'd pretended to be. And he was using it like a knife, cutting away every defense she'd built. Clara looked at the armed men, at Hale's confident expression, at the town watching from windows and doorways. She thought about running, about disappearing the way she'd disappeared from St. Louis. It would be easy, familiar. Then she thought about her students, about Rowan, about Margaret, and the schoolhouse that had been built from nothing but determination and hope. She thought about the person she'd been in St. Louis, silent, afraid, trapped, and the person she'd been trying to become here. And she made her choice. No, she said. Hale's smile faltered. Excuse me? I said no. You want to tell everyone about my past? Fine. Tell them. Tell them I had a husband who beat me for 3 years. Tell them I pointed an empty gun at his head because it was the only way to make him stop. Tell them I ran instead of staying and being killed. Clara's voice rose, loud enough for the watching town to hear. Tell them whatever you want, Mr. Hale, but I'm not leaving, and I'm not scared of you anymore. You should be. Hale's voice had gone cold. You're choosing your pride over your future. No, I'm choosing truth over lies. I'm choosing to stand instead of run. And I'm choosing to trust that the people here are better than you think they are, that they'll judge me on what I've done for this town, not what I did to survive somewhere else. She turned and walked back into the schoolhouse before Hale could respond. Her hands were shaking, her heart pounding, but she kept walking, kept her head high, kept moving forward instead of back. Behind her, she heard Hale's horse move. heard him say something she couldn't quite make out, then hoofbeats as he and his men rode away. Clara made it inside and closed the door before her legs gave out. She slid down to sit on the floor, breathing hard, waiting for the terror to catch up with the defiance. Instead, she felt something unexpected. Relief. The secret she'd been carrying, the shame she'd been hiding, it was out now. Or it would be soon. Hale would make sure of that. And instead of feeling destroyed by it, Clara felt almost free. She'd chosen truth. Finally. Whatever came next, at least it would be honest. The door opened and Margaret walked in, followed by Reverend Michaels and two of the parents whose children attended the school. They looked at Clara sitting on the floor and didn't say anything, just sat down beside her, a silent line of solidarity. "We heard," Margaret said finally. "All of it?" "Enough." Hale was shouting loud enough for half the town to hear. Margaret put a rough hand on Clara's shoulder. "For what it's worth, I don't care what you did in St. Louis. You've been nothing but good for this town since you arrived. That counts for more than any past you're carrying." "My children are staying in school," one of the mothers said firmly, "whatever that man says about you." "Mine too," the other added. "You've done more for them in 2 months than anyone else has their whole lives. That's what matters." Clara felt tears burn in her eyes. "Thank you." They sat like that until the light started fading, a small group of people who'd chosen each other despite everything. When they finally stood to leave, Clara felt stronger than she had in months. That strength lasted until she saw Rowan riding toward the schoolhouse like every demon in hell was chasing him. He dismounted before his horse fully stopped and pulled Clara into his arms hard enough to bruise. "I heard what happened," he said against her hair. "I heard what Hale threatened. Why didn't you send for me?" "Because I needed to handle it myself. Needed to choose standing over hiding." Clara pulled back enough to see his face. "He's going to tell everyone, Rowan. About my marriage, the gun, everything. By tomorrow, the whole territory will know." "I don't care." "You will. When people start asking why you're protecting someone who—" "I don't care," he repeated more forcefully. "You think I haven't done things I'm ashamed of? Things that would destroy any claim I have to being decent?" He cupped her face. "We've all got pasts, Clara. The only thing that matters is what we do with the time we have left. And I'm choosing to spend mine standing with you, whatever comes next." Clara kissed him then, hard and desperate and grateful. Not because she needed rescuing, but because he'd offered to stand with her when standing was the hardest thing to do. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara rested her forehead against his. "Hale's going to come at us with everything now," she said. "We embarrassed him, cost him his investors, refused to be scared. He's got nothing left to lose. Then we'd better be ready." Rowan's jaw set with determination. "Because this war's about to get a lot worse before it gets better." He was right. The next morning, Hale made his final move, and it wasn't anything Clara or Rowan had prepared for. Hale's final move came at dawn. Clara woke to the sound of horses and shouting, stumbled to her window, and saw 20 armed men surrounding Margaret's store. Her first thought was that Hale had come to kill her. Her second thought was that she needed to get to her pistol. She was reaching for her reticule when someone pounded on her door. "Clara, it's me." Margaret's voice, tight with tension. "Don't do anything stupid. Just get dressed and come downstairs." Clara dressed quickly, her hands steadier than they should have been. Fear did that sometimes, made you calm when you should have been shaking. She tucked the pistol into her pocket and went downstairs. Hale was waiting in the store, flanked by his men. He looked tired, Clara noticed, worn down in a way that suggested he'd been up all night planning this. "Miss Whitlock," he said, "I'm here to make you a final offer." "I'm not interested in your offers." "You will be, because this one isn't for you." He gestured to one of his men, who produced a document. "This is a deed to property in San Francisco, a building suitable for a school, fully funded for 5 years, equipment, supplies, salaries for additional teachers, everything you'd need to create a real educational institution, not a shed in the middle of nowhere." Clara stared at the document. "Why would you give me that?" "Because I'm not the monster you think I am. I genuinely believe in education, in progress, and I think you're wasting your talents here." Hale's expression was almost sincere. Take this offer. Build something that matters. Leave Red Hollow behind and let the people here solve their own problems. And Rowan? What happens to him? Mr. Creed and I will reach an accommodation. One that doesn't require violence or threats. Just two businessmen settling a dispute. Hale leaned forward. But that can only happen if you're not here, stirring him up, convincing him he's fighting for something noble instead of just being stubborn. Clara understood then. This wasn't about her at all. Hale had realized that as long as she was in Red Hollow, Rowan wouldn't back down. She'd become the reason he kept fighting, the thing worth protecting. Remove her, and Rowan became just another rancher who could be bought or broken. "You're trying to separate us, she said. "I'm trying to save lives. Yours, his, everyone in this valley who's going to suffer when this war turns bloody." Hale's voice dropped. "I know what happened yesterday. I know you stood up to me in front of the whole town. That was brave, foolish, and ultimately pointless. Because I still have power here, Miss Whitlock. I still have men and money and influence. And if you force me to use those things to destroy Creed, a lot of innocent people are going to get hurt in the process. So you're holding the town hostage unless I leave. I'm offering you a better life and giving you a reason to take it. There's a difference." Clara looked at Margaret, who was standing behind the counter with her arms crossed and her face carefully blank, looked at the armed men, at Hale's calculated expression, at the deed that represented everything she'd wanted when she first came to Red Hollow: safety, purpose, a chance to build something lasting. Then she thought about her students, about Rowan's burned ranch and Henderson's terror, and all the people who'd suffered because men with power thought that made them right. She thought about the woman she'd been in St. Louis and the woman she was trying to become here. "No," she said quietly. Hale's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake." "Probably, but it's my mistake to make." Clara met his eyes. "You can't buy me, Mr. Hale. You can't threaten me into leaving. And you can't separate me from Rowan by offering me something better somewhere else. I'm staying. We're both staying, and we're going to beat you." "With what? Your investors are gone. Your evidence is circumstantial at best. You have nothing. We have the truth, and we have each other. That's more than you've got." Hale stood abruptly. "Then you've chosen sides in a war you can't win. Don't say I didn't give you a chance." He walked out, his men following. Clara stood in the empty store, listening to the sound of horses riding away, and wondered if she'd just signed her own death warrant. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the stupidest," Margaret said into the silence. "Everyone keeps saying that. I'm starting to think it's both." Margaret came around the counter and pulled Clara into a brief, fierce hug. "Well, stupid or not, you're not facing this alone. None of us are." By noon, the whole town knew what had happened. By evening, Clara had her answer about whether people would judge her on her past or her present. 14 families showed up at the schoolhouse, some bringing their children for the first time, others bringing food and supplies. "Heard what you did?" one father said gruffly. "Heard what you've been through. Don't much care about any of that. All I care about is you've treated my boy like he matters. That's enough for me." It wasn't everyone. Some parents kept their children home, and Clara could see the whispers following her when she walked down the street. But enough people stood with her that the school stayed open, the students kept learning, and Clara realized she'd built something stronger than she'd known. Rowan found her that evening, sitting on the schoolhouse steps watching the sunset. "Heard about Hale's offer," he said, settling beside her. "Are you going to tell me I should have taken it?" "No. I'm going to tell you I'm terrified you didn't." He took her hand, threading their fingers together. "He's cornered now, Clara. Desperate. That makes him more dangerous than ever. Then what do we do? We finish this. Tonight. I've been waiting for evidence strong enough to take to the territorial governor. I think I finally have it." Clara turned to look at him. "What evidence?" "One of Hale's men came to me this afternoon. Said he's been keeping records of everything Hale's ordered him to do. Fires to set, people to threaten, property to damage. Said he's done with it, wants out, and he's willing to testify in exchange for immunity." Rowan's expression was grim. "His name's Jack Morrison. He's been Hale's foreman for 3 years. If he talks, if he produces those records, we can build a criminal case that'll actually hold up in court." Why would he betray Hale now? Because Hale told him to burn down the schoolhouse, with you inside. Rowan's hand tightened on hers. Morrison's got daughters, said he couldn't stomach killing a teacher, even for Hale's money, so he came to me instead. Clara felt cold. Hale ordered him to kill me. Yes, and Morrison's willing to testify to that, along with everything else. Rowan stood, pulling her up with him. But we need to move fast. Hale's going to realize Morrison's gone missing soon. When he does, he's going to come after us with everything he's got left. They rode to Rowan's ranch in the gathering darkness, Morrison's testimony burning in Clara's pocket like a live coal. The man himself was waiting in the cabin, nervous and haunted, his hands shaking as he signed the formal statement Clara had written. "This makes me a traitor," Morrison said. "Hale's going to come after me." "Not if we move first," Rowan said. "Tomorrow morning, we ride to the territorial capital. We present this evidence to the governor personally. By tomorrow night, Hale's the one who's going to be running." Tri potriti masamon. But they never made it to tomorrow morning. The attack came at midnight. Clara was sleeping in one of the ranch's guest rooms when the sound of gunfire jerked her awake. She grabbed her pistol and ran to the window, saw flames erupting from one of the outbuildings, heard shouting and the crack of rifles. Rowan burst through her door. "Get dressed. We're under attack." "How many?" "Too many. Hale brought everyone he's got. Maybe 30 men. They're trying to burn us out." His face was tight with controlled fury. "I need you to get Morrison to safety. Take 2 horses, ride west to the canyon, wait for me there. I'm not leaving you. Clara, I'm not leaving you," she repeated more forcefully. "We fight this together or we don't fight at all. That was the deal." Rowan looked like he wanted to argue, then nodded sharply. "Fine, but stay close and stay armed. This is going to get ugly." It was already ugly. By the time they made it outside, 3 buildings were burning and Rowan's men were engaged in a firefight with Hale's forces. Clara saw Hale himself near the tree line, shouting orders, his face illuminated by flames. "There," she said, pointing. "If we can get to Hale, end this directly." "No, he's got too many men around him. We'd never make it." Rowan fired twice at shadows moving near the barn. "We need to fall back, regroup. This position isn't defensible." They retreated to the stone house, the only building not actively burning, with Morrison and 8 of Rowan's men. Hale's forces surrounded them, keeping up steady fire, clearly trying to pin them down until the flames spread. Clara crouched behind an overturned table, reloading her pistol with shaking hands. She'd never actually fired at another person, had no idea if she could pull the trigger when the moment came. But watching Hale's men trying to burn them alive, watching everything Rowan had built go up in flames, she felt something cold and resolute settle in her chest. If this was how it ended, she'd go down fighting. "We can't hold this position," Webb shouted from across the room. "The fire's spreading too fast. Then we break out, scatter, and regroup at the canyon." Rowan looked at Clara. "You go first with Morrison. I'll cover you." "We go together," Clara insisted. Before Rowan could argue, a voice called from outside. "Creed, I know you're in there." Hale. Standing in the open now, illuminated by the burning buildings, either supremely confident or completely insane. Rowan moved to the window. "What do you want, Hale?" "To end this before more people die. Send out Morrison and the woman. You can keep your land, your water, whatever's left of your ranch. All I want is them." "So you can kill them? Not a chance. So I can leave the territory with something to show for 3 years of work. Morrison's testimony is the only thing that can hurt me legally. The woman's the only thing keeping you from being reasonable." Hale's voice carried across the yard. "Give them to me and walk away. Or stay in there and burn with everything you own." Clara looked at Rowan, saw the calculation in his eyes, the desperate math of how many people he could save versus how many he was willing to sacrifice, saw him looking at her like she was something precious he couldn't bear to lose. She made her decision before he could make his. "I'm going out there," she said quietly. "No. Listen to me." Clara grabbed his arm. "Hale doesn't want to kill me in front of witnesses. He wants leverage. If I surrender, if I make him think he's won, it buys you time to get Morrison out safely, time to get help. He'll kill you the moment he has you. Maybe. Or maybe he'll get careless, make a mistake, give you an opening. Clara pulled him close, kissed him hard. Trust me, please. Clara, trust me, she repeated. Then before he could stop her, she stood and walked to the door. I'm coming out, she called. Don't shoot. She stepped into the firelit yard with her hands raised, her pistol left behind on the table, walked toward Hale like she was walking to her execution. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to dive for cover, to do anything except keep moving toward the man who wanted her dead. But she kept walking. Hale watched her approach with an expression she couldn't read. Behind him, his men had their rifles trained on her. Clara stopped 10 feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to run if she got the chance. Smart choice, Hale said. Where's Morrison? Inside. You can have him after you let me see your investors. Hale laughed. My investors are gone, Miss Whitlock, thanks to you. Not all of them. Donovan, Porter, Whitfield, they're all staying at the hotel in Red Hollow, probably watching the fire from their windows right now. Clara kept her voice steady. What do you think they're going to say when they see this? When they realize you're not just strong-arming ranchers, but actually burning them out? When they testify that you ordered an attack on civilians? They won't testify to anything. They'll get on the first stage out and pretend they were never here. Will they? Or will they stay and watch you hang for murder? Clara took a step closer. You've already lost, Hale. Your funding's gone, your reputation's destroyed, and in about 12 hours the territorial governor is going to have Morrison's testimony on his desk. This isn't strategy anymore. This is just you burning everything down because you can't admit you lost. For the first time, Hale looked uncertain. You're bluffing. Am I? Then why am I standing here instead of running? Why would I surrender if I thought you were going to kill me? She saw it then, the flicker of doubt, the moment where Hale's confidence cracked just slightly. And in that moment, Clara understood something crucial. He'd never actually planned what to do after he won. He'd been so focused on forcing Rowan to surrender that he hadn't thought through the consequences of actually succeeding. Let me propose something, Clara said. You let Rowan and his men leave safely. You let Morrison testify about everything except tonight. And in exchange, I'll convince the territorial governor that you were operating on bad information, that you genuinely believed you were acquiring land legally. Why would you do that? Because I don't want you in prison. I want you gone. Out of this territory, away from this valley, powerless to hurt anyone else. Clara met his eyes. You've lost your investors, your reputation, your operation. Take what money you have left and disappear. Start over somewhere else where people don't know what you've done. That's a better deal than hanging. Hale stared at her, and Clara could see him calculating, trying to figure out the trap. But there was no trap. She was offering him the same thing she'd wanted when she left St. Louis, a chance to escape the consequences of his actions and start fresh. It was more mercy than he deserved, but it was also the only way to end this without more bloodshed. And if I refuse, Hale asked, then Morrison testifies to everything, including tonight. You're arrested for attempted murder, arson, extortion, and about 15 other crimes. You die in prison or you die on a gallows, but either way, you die. Clara's voice was calm, factual. Or you take the offer and live. Your choice. Behind Hale, his men were starting to shift nervously. They'd signed up to intimidate ranchers, not commit murder in front of witnesses. Clara could see the calculation spreading through the group. Was Hale worth dying for? Apparently not. One of the men lowered his rifle, then another, then a third. Within moments, half of Hale's force had backed away, creating distance between themselves and their employer. Hale saw it happening and his face went white with fury. You're all cowards. We're all smart enough to know when we're beat, one of them said. This is done, Hale. Take the offer while you've got it. For a long moment, Clara thought Hale might refuse out of pure spite, might decide that if he was going down, he'd take everyone with him. His hand moved toward his gun, and Clara tensed, ready to dive aside. Then Rowan's voice cut through the tension. Don't! He'd emerged from the house, rifle aimed directly at Hale. You draw that gun, and you're dead before it clears leather. Take Clara's offer. Leave. Live to fight another day somewhere else. Hale looked between them. Clara standing in the open, Rowan with his rifle, the burning buildings and abandoned men. Looked at everything he'd built and everything he'd lost. Then he dropped his hand from his gun. "Fine," he said, his voice hollow. "I'll take the offer, but I want it in writing. Witnessed and notarized." You'll have it by tomorrow," Clara said, "and I want your word, both of you, that this ends here. No revenge, no coming after me later." Rowan lowered his rifle slightly. "You have it, as long as you leave this territory and never come back." Hale nodded once, sharply. Then he turned to his remaining men. "Mount up, we're done here." They rode away into the darkness, leaving Clara standing in a yard full of fire and ash, shaking so hard she could barely stand. Rowan was beside her in seconds, catching her as her legs gave out. "You're insane," he said, but he was smiling. "Completely, absolutely insane. You just negotiated with an armed man who wanted you dead. I gambled that he wanted to live more than he wanted me dead. Looks like I was right." Clara buried her face in his chest, feeling the adrenaline drain away and leave her hollow. "Is it over? Really over?" "Not yet. We still need to get Morrison's testimony to the governor, make sure Hale actually leaves, rebuild everything that burned." Rowan pulled back enough to look at her face. "But the war part? Yeah, that's over. You won." "We won," Clara corrected. "Together." They spent the rest of the night putting out fires and taking inventory of the damage. 3 buildings completely destroyed, 2 more badly damaged, but the house, the stone house where Rowan's family had died, still stood. Morrison gave his formal testimony at dawn, with Charles Donovan serving as witness. By noon, 2 of Rowan's men were riding to the territorial capital with documentation that would end Hale's career even if it didn't land him in prison. And by evening, word came that Victor Hale had boarded a stage heading east, taking nothing but the clothes on his back and whatever money he had left. He was gone. Red Hollow celebrated that night, not with a formal party or organized event, just people gathering in the saloon and the street, talking and laughing and slowly letting go of the fear they'd been carrying for months. Clara found herself surrounded by parents thanking her, students hugging her legs, townspeople who'd barely spoken to her before suddenly treating her like she belonged. "You did this," Margaret said, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of whiskey. "You and that stubborn streak of yours." "Rowan did it. Morrison did it. Everyone who stood up to Hale did it." Clara accepted the glass. "I just refused to back down. That's all it takes sometimes. One person refusing to bend, showing everyone else it's possible." Margaret clinked her glass against Clara's, to stubbornness and survival. "I'll drink to that." They did, and Clara felt something unknot in her chest that had been tight for months, maybe years. She was safe, not because she'd hidden or run or made herself small, but because she'd stood and fought and refused to let fear make her choices. It felt like freedom. She found Rowan later that night, standing outside his burned ranch, surveying the damage. "It's not as bad as it looks," she offered. "It's exactly as bad as it looks. Took me 10 years to build all this, gone in one night." He didn't sound bitter, just tired. "But at least nobody died. That's something. You can rebuild, bigger, better, without having to watch your back constantly." "Maybe." He pulled her against his side. "Or maybe I'll build something different. Something that's not just about protecting what I own, but actually creating something worth having." "Like what?" "I don't know yet. A real town, maybe, with schools and stores and people who aren't terrified all the time. A place where someone like you can teach, and someone like me can ranch, and we don't have to spend every day wondering if today's the day everything burns down." He looked at her. "Think that's possible?" "I think if we can beat Victor Hale, we can probably do anything." They stood in the ruins of what had been, both of them damaged and scarred but still standing, and Clara realized something that made her breath catch. "I love you," she said. Rowan went very still. "What?" "I love you. I didn't mean to, didn't plan on it, but somewhere between you dancing with me and burning bank drafts and standing with me against everything Hale threw at us, I fell in love with you." Clara turned to face him fully. "I know it's complicated. I know we're both broken in different ways, but I'm tired of pretending I don't feel what I feel." Rowan cupped her face with both hands, his expression intense. "I loved my wife. Thought I'd never feel that way about anyone again. Didn't want to because caring about someone means you can lose them, and I couldn't survive that twice." He kissed her forehead. "But you made me want to try anyway. Made me remember what it feels like to have something worth protecting that isn't just land or pride. Is that a yes?" "That's a, I love you too, you stubborn, brilliant, terrifying woman." He kissed her properly then, soft and sweet and full of promise. "So what do we do now?" "Now?" Clara smiled against his mouth. "Now we build something better than what came before. Now we prove that people who've been broken can still create beautiful things. Now we live." The rebuilding started the next morning, not just of Rowan's ranch, but of the whole valley's future. With Hale gone and his operation dissolved, the land rights reverted to their original owners. The territorial governor, impressed by Morrison's testimony and Clara's negotiation skills, appointed a commission to ensure fair water access for everyone in the valley. The school got a new building, a real one this time, with proper walls and desks and a small library funded by anonymous donors that everyone suspected were the same investors who'd pulled out of Hale's operation. Clara's class grew to 23 students, then 35, then more than she could handle alone. She hired 2 assistant teachers, both women from Red Hollow, who'd never had the chance to use their education before. And 6 months after Hale left the territory, on a cool autumn morning with leaves turning gold on the mountainsides, Clara Whitlock married Rowan Creed in a ceremony that brought together everyone who'd fought in the Range War that had nearly destroyed them all. It wasn't a fancy wedding. Margaret baked the cake, Reverend Michaels performed the ceremony, and the whole town showed up to witness 2 broken people promising to build something whole together. Clara wore a simple dress she'd made herself, and Rowan wore his best suit. And when they exchanged vows in front of everyone who mattered, Clara felt like she'd finally come home. Not to a place, but to a person, to a life that was hers by choice instead of circumstance. They honeymooned at the ranch, which was still being rebuilt, but was starting to look like something again. Rowan had plans for a new house, bigger, with windows that faced the valley and rooms designed for a family instead of a fortress. Clara had plans for expanding the school, maybe even starting a lending library for the whole town, but mostly they just had plans to be together. To wake up each morning without fear, to build a life that was ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. "You ever regret it?" Rowan asked one evening as they sat on the porch of the temporary cabin that served as their home. "Coming to Red Hollow? Everything that happened after?" Clara thought about the woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach months ago, scared, running, trying to disappear into anonymity. Thought about everything she'd survived since then, all the battles fought and won and lost. "No," she said honestly. "I regret being scared for so long before I got here. I regret all the years I spent thinking I had to be small to be safe. But coming here, fighting Hale, falling in love with you, and those are the best decisions I've ever made. Even though they almost got you killed, especially because of that, because I chose them, because they were mine." She leaned against him. "I spent my whole life having choices made for me, by my father, my husband, society. This was the first time I got to choose what mattered, consequences be damned. That's worth more than safety ever was." Rowan kissed the top of her head. "You know what I learned from all this?" "What?" "That the people who scare us most aren't the ones with guns and money. They're the ones who make us want to be better than we are, who see through all our defenses and love us anyway." He tilted her face up to look at him. "You terrify me, Clara Creed, but I wouldn't have it any other way." Clara smiled at her new name, Clara Creed, schoolteacher and rancher's wife, survivor and fighter and builder of futures. It suited her better than Whitlock or Hartwell ever had. "Good," she said. Because I'm planning to terrify you for a very long time." They sat together as the sun set over the valley they'd saved. 2 people who'd learned that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones that make us who we're meant to be. That running from the past doesn't work unless you're running toward something better. That love isn't about being perfect or safe. It's about choosing each other, every day, even when it's hard. especially when it's hard. The next year brought changes Clara couldn't have imagined. The school expanded again, this time with a dedicated building and funding from the Territorial Education Board. 3 more teachers joined the staff, and students started coming from neighboring towns, boarding with local families during the week. Rowan's ranch prospered once the water disputes were settled fairly. He hired more men, expanded his herds, and started breeding horses that became famous throughout the territory for their strength and temperament. More importantly, he started working with other ranchers instead of against them, building cooperative agreements that benefited everyone. Red Hollow itself transformed from a rough frontier town into something approaching civilization. New businesses opened, a proper general store to replace Margaret's expanded operation, a restaurant, a boarding house for travelers. The saloon cleaned up its act and started serving decent food alongside the whiskey. Even Sheriff Brennan, faced with the choice of actual law enforcement or retirement, chose retirement and was replaced by a young deputy from the territorial capital who actually believed in justice. But the biggest change came the morning Clara woke up nauseous and realized she was pregnant. She didn't tell Rowan immediately. Spent a few days sitting with the knowledge, examining her feelings about bringing a child into the world when she'd sworn she never would. Her own childhood had been cold, her marriage had been violent, and the idea of being responsible for another human being's well-being terrified her in ways Hale never had. But she also remembered her students, the way they soaked up knowledge and kindness like they'd been starving for it, the way they transformed when someone believed in them. And she thought about Rowan, about the gentleness he hid under all that hardness, about the way he'd chosen healing over revenge. Maybe they could do this. Maybe 2 broken people could raise a child who wasn't broken. Maybe that was the whole point, not to be perfect, but to try anyway. She told him on a Sunday morning in early spring, when the valley was turning green and the ranch was finally rebuilt. "I'm pregnant," she said, no preamble or build-up. Rowan froze with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "You're what?" "Pregnant. Going to have a baby, probably in about 6 months if I'm calculating right." He set down the cup very carefully, like he was afraid his hands might not work properly. "Are you sure?" "Margaret confirmed it yesterday. She's delivered half the babies in this valley, so yes, I'm sure." Clara watched his face, trying to read his reaction. "Say something." "I don't know what to say. I never thought, after my daughter, I didn't think I'd ever—" He stood abruptly, paced to the window, paced back. "Are you happy about this?" "I'm terrified. But yes, I think I'm happy." Clara moved to stand in front of him. "Are you?" "I'm terrified too. What if I can't protect them? What if something happens and I'm not there? What if I'm a terrible father?" The words tumbled out, all the fear he'd been hiding since the day they met. "I failed my family once, Clara. I can't do it again." "You didn't fail them. You weren't there, which is different, and you're not the same man you were 10 years ago." She took his hands. "You're someone who chose thinking over violence, who built instead of destroyed, who loves me even though I'm stubborn and reckless and keep putting myself in danger. If you can do all that, you can figure out how to be a father." "But what if we fail? What if we make mistakes? What if our child grows up and hates us?" Clara smiled. "Then we'll be like every other parent in the world, doing our best and hoping it's enough. That's all anyone can do." Rowan pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "A baby. We're having a baby." "Yes." "This is insane." "Completely." "I love you." "I love you too." Clara pulled back to look at him. "So we're doing this?" "We're doing this." He kissed her, gentle and reverent. Together. Their daughter was born in October, on a day when the aspens were golden and the air smelled like winter coming. The birth was long and difficult, and there was a moment, just a moment, when Clara thought she might not survive it. But Margaret was there, talking her through it with the same no-nonsense competence she brought to everything. And Rowan was there, holding her hand and looking more terrified than he'd ever been facing armed men. And then suddenly there was a baby, tiny and red-faced and screaming like she was furious at the world for existing. "She's got your temper," Rowan said, sounding awed. "She's got your stubbornness," Clara replied, exhausted but unable to stop smiling. They named her Emma after Rowan's mother. Emma Creed, born into a world that was safer and kinder than the one her parents had known, but still rough around the edges. Born to two people who'd survived things that should have destroyed them and chose to build something beautiful anyway. Clara went back to teaching 3 months later, bringing Emma with her in a cradle one of the students' fathers had made. The children adored her, took turns rocking the cradle when Emma fussed, treated her like a mascot for their school. It was chaotic and unconventional, and nothing like the proper educational environment Clara had been trained for. It was also perfect. The years that followed weren't easy. There were droughts and hard winters, economic panics and territorial disputes. There were times when Clara questioned every choice she'd made, when Rowan retreated into his silence, when Emma screamed for hours and nothing helped. There were arguments and mistakes and moments of doubt. But there were also mornings waking up next to someone who chose her every day, evenings watching Emma learn to walk, to talk, to read, students graduating from the school and coming back to teach the next generation, the valley transforming from a battleground into a community. And there was the knowledge that Clara had done something she'd once thought impossible. She'd stopped running. She'd planted roots. She'd built a life that was hers by choice, messy and imperfect and real. On Emma's 5th birthday, they had a party at the ranch. Half the valley showed up, students and parents, ranchers and townspeople, everyone who'd been part of the fight against hail or the rebuilding that followed. Margaret made a cake that was more ambition than skill, but Emma declared it the best cake ever. The children played while the adults talked, and for a few hours it felt like peace was possible. Clara found herself standing apart from the celebration, watching Rowan teach Emma how to ride her first pony. He was patient and encouraging, everything his own father had been, and more. Emma was fearless, laughing every time the pony trotted, demanding to go faster. "You did good," Margaret said, appearing beside her. "We did good," Clara corrected. "All of us. The whole valley." "Maybe, but it started with you refusing to run, with you looking a killer in the eye and not flinching." Margaret smiled. Changed everything that moment. Changed you, changed Creed, changed this whole town. Clara thought about the woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach years ago, terrified and running from a past that was chasing her. Thought about all the versions of herself she'd been, the obedient daughter, the battered wife, the desperate fugitive, and finally the person she'd chosen to become. Teacher, fighter, wife, mother. Whole instead of broken, even with all her scars. "You know what I learned?" Clara said quietly. "What?" "That the past doesn't define us unless we let it. That being scared is different from being weak. And that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose to build instead of destroy, even when destruction seems easier." She watched Emma laugh as Rowan lifted her off the pony. "I spent years thinking I had to be perfect to deserve good things. Turns out I just had to be willing to try. That's deeper than I expected for a 5-year-old's birthday party." Clara laughed. "Fair point. Should we go eat that terrible cake before the children devour it all?" "Probably." They rejoined the celebration, and Clara let herself be pulled into the chaos and joy of it. Let herself be part of something bigger than her own fear or pride. Let herself be happy without waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because that was the final lesson she'd learned in Red Hollow. That happiness wasn't something you earned or deserved. It was something you chose every day, despite everything that tried to take it away. It was waking up next to someone you loved and choosing them again. It was teaching children who needed you and being needed in return. It was building a life that mattered and defending it when necessary. It was standing in the ashes of everything you'd lost and planting seeds anyway, trusting that something would grow. Years later, when Emma was grown and Clara's hair had gone gray and Rowan's hands shook from old injuries, people would ask about the Range War, about Victor Hale and the fight for the valley. They'd want to hear about gunfights and dramatic confrontations, about heroes and villains and clear-cut victories. Clara would tell them the truth, that real courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. That winning wasn't about being the strongest or the most ruthless. It was about being the most persistent, the most willing to keep trying when everyone else gave up. And she'd tell them about love, not the easy kind from stories and songs, but the hard kind that required choosing each other every single day. The kind that survived arguments and disappointments and all the small failures that came with being human. The kind that said, I see all your broken pieces and I choose you anyway. That was the legacy Clara Whitlock, no, Clara Creed, left behind. Not a fairy tale or a legend, but a story about real people making hard choices and living with the consequences. About a woman who ran until she found something worth standing for. About a man who'd lost everything and learned to build again. About a town that survived by refusing to give in to fear. And about a teacher who proved that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is educate children, love honestly, and refuse to let powerful men dictate the terms of your life. The schoolhouse she built still stands in Red Hollow, larger now, with Clara's name on a plaque by the door. The ranch Rowan rebuilt has been in the Creed family for 4 generations, and the valley that nearly tore itself apart became one of the most prosperous in the territory, proof that cooperation works better than conquest. But the real legacy wasn't in buildings or land or prosperity. It was in the lesson Clara taught her daughter and her students, and everyone who knew her story, that you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become after. You are the person you decide to be when you stop running and start building. You are the sum of your choices, not your circumstances. And sometimes, the person who arrives with nothing becomes the reason everyone else survives. That's not just Clara's story. It's the story of anyone who's ever been broken and chosen to heal anyway. Who's ever been scared and acted brave anyway? Who's ever been told they don't matter and proved them wrong by mattering to someone? It's a story about redemption that doesn't erase the past, just refuses to be defined by it. About love that isn't perfect but is real. About courage that looks like showing up every day and doing the work, even when the work is hard and the outcome is uncertain. And it's a story that says you can survive the fire. You can build from the ashes. You can be broken and still be whole. You just have to choose to keep going. Emma Creed grew up hearing these stories, watching her mother teach and her father build, learning that strength comes in many forms and that the people who matter most are the ones who stand with you when standing is hard. She became a teacher herself, carrying forward Clara's work, expanding the school into a college that drew students from across the territory. And when she was old enough to understand, when the romance had faded into reality and the legend had become just life, Emma asked her mother the question that mattered most. Do you regret any of it? The fear, the fighting, the almost dying? Clara, old now but still sharp-eyed, considered the question, thought about Thomas Hartwell and the empty gun, about Victor Hale and the choices that could have gone differently, about every moment of terror and triumph that led her here. No, she said finally, because all of it, the good and the bad, the victories and the mistakes, all of it brought me here. To you, to your father, to this life we built. And I wouldn't trade this for anything. Not even for safety, for an easier path? Especially not for that. Safe and easy would have meant hiding forever. This meant living. Clara smiled. And living, really living, is worth every scar. That's the story. Not of a perfect hero or a flawless victory, but of real people choosing to be better than their circumstances allowed. Of a woman who stopped running and started fighting. Of a man who chose mercy over revenge. Of a community that survived by standing together. It's a story that says, you are not your past, you are your choices. And every day you wake up is another chance to choose who you want to become. Clara Creed chose to become someone who mattered. Someone who built instead of destroyed. Someone who loved despite the risk. Someone who turned ashes into legacy. And in the end, that's the most any of us can hope for. To matter to someone. To build something that lasts, and to leave the world a little better than we found it. Not through grand gestures or heroic sacrifices, but through the small daily choice to keep showing up, to keep trying, to keep loving, to keep building from the ashes until something beautiful grows. That's how a stranger in a lawless town became the reason everyone survived. That's how Clara Creed changed Red Hollow. And that's how she changed herself. The end.